doesn't have a meaning, but it's represented as a difference between two sounds. So,
I'm sorry? He's going to be stubborn about that, I think.
Yeah, I know. I figured. All right, have a good one.
Two words differ by one little sound, the vowel in the middle, O, the ah, or the ah. Now, if come from Buffalo or Rochester, and I say cat, I say kid. So it's not the same sound. It's the same thing. That's what I'm calling a function. It has the same function. It serves to differentiate one word from another through its sound. And depending on regional differences, the same function is expressed by different sounds. Those are the allophones. Phone, sound, allophone. So all of the sounds that have the same function in the language are the allophones of the phone. Phonemics is the study of those differences. Phonetics is the study of the sounds. Phonology is the study of how you actually material of
I have to speak in a different voice. Oh, shit. All you people out there, whole world.
The podcast may go to the whole world, so don't speak too soon.
Well, I already, whenever you speak, you're speaking too soon. No, but here, this is the thing I wanted to say about the history of why. I mean, this is a good point to start. Why would I say that this difference between the phoneme and a syllable is? I mean, I'm not saying it's easy to and exaggerate what I'm saying. It's just to make a point. So the problem with exaggerating to make a point is that somebody. Nobody here, but somebody might think that you're making a proposition. Take it as you say it, and then find some nuance that's been not taken into account and disputed. But I'm taking into account all nuances. I mean, that's the whole point of having phonology, is that you can always blur the semantic content by expressing too many things.
What do you guys mean?
Speak into the microphone. No. Don't speak into the microphone.
You can clarify the same way too.
What?
You can clarify the semantic context the same way too.
Well, endlessly.
So say something that wouldn't necessarily be taken as a joke, but then you can make a cough afterwards, which doesn't serve any typical semantic function, but is a pragmatic role in context.
If you're, you switch your focus from actually using language to making the language the object of your attention, you can do all kinds of things. If you do it too well, you totally destroy the possibility of using language. And so what one needs to simply notice is that linguistics creates an object called language, which, as with all paranoid surveillance techniques, always tries to take into account more and more and more and more and more and more of what it forgot to take into account when it started in the first place. And that's what our intelligence does, what our scientific minds do. Is after a long period of historical vacillation, an object is discerned. That object is now the discernment of that object defines the discipline. Participation in the discipline is defined by your agreeing to keep your attention on that object. So all of the other things that language might mean, besides what linguistics says it is, everybody's the people who are committed to the discipline are always looking around the corner of their own discipline to see if somebody's going to say something as language that they didn't take into account, and then they'll find a way of taking it into account. That's what happens. That's our world. Let me tell you this little history about the thing, and then I'll tell you a story about what no linguist would say is language, or maybe they would, but it gets to the edge. Saussure had basically two major insights. There are many, actually. It's a whole complicated system that gets way beyond the phony, but there are two ideas. One is that language, on the one hand, is what we speak. On the other hand, it's the underlying system that makes it possible to speak. And in French, one was called langue, L-A-N-G-U-E. The other is called parole, meaning talk. So the idea is that whenever you speak, you are specifying in parole a possibility that that belongs to the underlying system. So you now have this notion of a structure that is not something that you're conscious of, that can be specified by the grammar of the language, that in somehow you become competent in manipulating. That's called learning the language, and you perform the parole by being competent in the law. And so that gives you a very interesting structure, that gives you a very interesting picture of the relationship between a structure and a phenomena. Phenomena is what you experience when you talk. The structure is an underlying thing which you're not conscious of at all, unless you join the team of accepting that this description of language is what language really is. Yeah.
How would you say Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations?
Let's run this through, and then we'll lay it up against Wittgenstein, okay? Because definitely Wittgenstein is it's a thorn in the lion's toe, and there ain't any Androcles that's come and taken it out in a nice friendly way. So actually, in a way there is, because that's what produces semantic analysis and pragmatic linguistics and all of that. That all comes from trying to respond to Wittgenstein. Adequate or not, you can decide for yourself, because you can stand outside and say, well, anyway. But I want to give, this is the history that I wanted to give, and this is a kind of pop textbook picture of it, because this is what it would be. Once you've identified language as this object which has an underlying structure and phenomenology of its use, and it doesn't take much to notice that the languages that have this structure are part of a more complex anthropological study, namely the study of cultures, because it's cultures that have languages. So what if you looked at other aspects of culture in the same way, and you come up with Mr. Levi-Strauss, who was the anthropologist of structuralist fame, who one of the things he does is he takes Saussurean linguistics and figures out how you might apply that to culture in general, to particularly the study of mythology. In mythology, you're not studying with language, not studying language now, you're studying with stories. And you divide the stories up into what its elementary parts would be, and you try to describe an underlying structure of which the particular stories that are told under different circumstances function as a phenomenon. So you have that same thing. So there you have a structural study of myth, structural study of cultures, and then people start applying that to gestures, and people start applying that to political relations and every other thing. But ultimately you have this notion of the relationship between an underlying structure, which is not something that you're conscious of, and the performance of the particular thing. Okay. So put that in column A. In column B, you have a history of something called phenomenology. Phenomenology is a development in late 19th century philosophy that wants to, well, it begins with the notion that in addition to all the things that physiology and the structure of the human being as a physical object in the world, once you've described all of that, you've left out what it's like to be a human being. You've left out consciousness. So, okay, let's make a science of consciousness and try to study what is true of all consciousness. And you have the main character here is Edmund Husserl, who elaborates an enormously exuberant way of describing conscious structures. So now you have two modern movements. You have a movement that is interested in consciousness from the point of view of describing its general characteristics. I could go into detail about what those are, but just for the moment, just to say that. On the other hand, you have a series of sciences which are interested in the relationship between underlying unconscious structures and the phenomena which are simply readouts of possibilities within those structures. We'll put psychoanalysis alongside that, because that's happening too. But, so in other words, when I say unconscious, not necessarily meaning a Freudian or a Jungian or an Adlerian or whatever kind of unconscious. Just mean the fact that you possess the competence in manipulating the structure. Okay? Yeah. Or paraconscious, because it's not that it's in principle. I mean, you can become conscious of it, sort of. That's what you do when you get excited about linguistics. You start noticing all kinds of stuff. So now you have these two different possibilities for entire philosophies. And now I'll introduce another nice word that sort of is a sky dome over it all, ontology. You know this word ontology? Do you? Yeah, okay. Okay. Ontology is the word, it's a complicated word from a Greek word that means being. So ontology means the study of being. And it would be a general word for what we more loosely call philosophy. The total picture of what is. You have a picture of what things are in toto. That's an ontology. And it becomes kind of clear that even though there could be many different kinds of phenomenology and many different structures, the basic approach to what being is different in phenomenology than it is in structuralism. Because in structuralism, you're always talking about something that is not a phenomena. Phenomenology, phenomena means what comes to appear. The phenomena comes from another Greek word that means to show or to shine or to appear. So phenomena. No? Not exactly. That's a whole different path. It means its basic meaning is to shine. Something shows itself is a phenomenon. So if you fundamentally think that what really counts as real is what you experience, I mean, existentialism was a kind of offshoot of phenomenology, really. He said, these are all Mortimer Adler level of pop psychology. I mean, to give this scheme, what I'm saying is unexceptional. I don't think I'm saying anything particularly weird.
But it's obviously
Big
Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, okay. So if phenomenology is fundamentally the attitude that what counts is what's real. What counts as real is what shows itself to you. And structuralism is what counts as real are the structures that underlie that. You've got two different ontological attitudes. Yes.
Sorry. When you talk about possibilities, though, I mean, at least what it seems apparent to me is that it presents itself as well in existentialism. Then you have, someone like Camus saying that, you can almost make any sort of reality you want if you are willing to do whatever is necessary. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, no, we can get to that. I'm actually trying to control this by saying the whole point of this is to get to the point where I can say that the difference between a phoneme and a syllable is at the basis of postmodern. Okay. That's the excuse for this particular little cliff note journey through the whole shebang. Okay. Levi-Strauss sets out to go to war against the phenomenologists. And so you have, the phenomenologist at this point really is the Mr. Existentialism with a capital E, Jean-Paul Sartre. And the debate between Sartre and Levi-Strauss continued through the life of Sartre. Levi-Strauss long outlived him. He just died at 102, maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. But he didn't write too much new. His main stuff was... So anyway, so you have this one idea is that Sartre's position is science be damned, though we acknowledge the material world as the only reality in some sense. But what matters is consciousness. What matters is our experience. Sartre says there's stuff, Levi-Strauss says there's stuff absolutely essential to everything we experience that we can't experience. Something that's not present, that is what's more real, it's the deeper reality is the reality of the relationship between the phenomena and the structures, not the phenomena themselves. Come Mr. Jacques Derrida, late 60s. Most important work is really done in the late 60s. There are actually 3 books that came out in like 1968, 69, something like that. He says that the phenomena themselves, like Levi-Strauss, are based upon that which cannot be made present, the phonemes. You can see them only through their manifestations, but you can't grasp the system. If you had to actually grasp the system in order to speak, you're mute from the start. But that relationship between structures which are ungraspable and their phenomena is itself a fundamental principle that interferes with our ability to create for ourselves a coherent picture of reality. And that's the famous deconstruction, that you can always look at any set of propositions and show that there's an underlying set of relationships which themselves can't be made into something ultimate, that themselves will reveal other structures. And that goes infinitely. And so the fundamental reality is this, his first word for it was différence, which meant a combination, it was a neologism that meant to both to differ and to defer. And so that you try to make something present to yourself in one of 2 ways, either something that you can look at or sense, or something that you can bring before the mind in a clear concept. Both are different forms of presence. One will lead you to a kind of Platonism where you think you can actually have visions of the forms. The other lives to a kind of empiricism in which you think that reality is based on what the senses tell you. And in both cases, there are gaps. You always are discovering where you thought something that was the same, you find difference. And wherever you think you can put yourself in the presence of something, the actual presence of the thing you're trying to find is deferred. So difference is a kind of placeholder instead of a metaphysics or instead of an ontology. What you get is this squishy thing that always slips away. So in a sense, then you have other thinkers which are similarly, but not exactly the same as Derrida, involved in a critique of presence. One is Foucault, who uses structural concepts to critique on metaphysics and presence. The other is Jacques Lacan, the psychoanalyst, who combines Levi-Strauss with Freud and says that the Freudian unconscious is itself structured in the same way that a language is structured. That's the single insight, that the unconscious is structured like a language. And therefore, it has a particularly poignant relationship to language itself. Because, so it's always, anyway, so just simply, so that's what I'm saying. If you take the sort of the holy trinity of both modern, French postmodernism, which was Foucault, Lacan, and Derrida, they all depend on that single insight of Saussure and the elaboration of it through all the other disciplines. And then the critique of metaphysics that comes from that insight. Roughly, that's where I go. Now, if you want to bring the Wittgenstein question in relationship to language, it's a wonderful position because his critique isn't particularly initially in relationship to Saussure or that. It's in relationship to all the different ways that philosophy tries to get a handle on reality and in a certain sense dictate reality through conceptualization. And he says, well, you can do this, but that's what philosophers do. But human beings learn to talk, and words don't have conceptual meanings; they have uses. And so you can never really hammer down the meaning of it. So that gets to this other question, which I think Jesse said that you wanted to talk, which is the set theory.
Oh, yeah. I don't know.
You don't know. Why? You won't take responsibility for having stolen Jesse's phone and put a message on it that says maybe talk about set theory.
I'm trying to think. There was something I wanted to tie that in with. Oh, maybe set theory and Levinas or something. Or just like to hear some thoughts about Levinas.
We're going to tell you what this one.
Yeah, it don't matter.
Okay, so I don't want to talk about set theory.
At this
Levinas still has a hole.
No, at this level we can talk about Levinas too. Well, yeah, please interject anything.
It seems like
That which is the
conception of ontology is divided into
knowledgists and the structuralists.
Yeah,
well,
the whole idea of possibility, which possibility in general, as it is, doesn't seem to tie into even one, because what's presented to you is just what is presented to you, and what is just what is. There's no question of what could, and the could be is the sort of question.
well, okay. I mean, we can come to possibility in a lot of different ways. It's interesting. It's an interesting. Well, I
think though that when he was talking about structure, the underlying structure, he was talking explicitly about.
I'm not talking about possibility as it is. I'm talking about possibility.
Yeah, no, Dick. Possibility is a gorgeous. It's a gorgeous. Creating possibility. Okay. Because the different philosophers, the term possibility, you have this European divide between British philosophy and continental philosophy. And British philosophy tend towards empiricism and logicism. The French tend towards this kind of structuralism, the Germans
restores that phenomenology. Stupid schema, but like that. They all talk about possibility, and in a number of different ways that makes it obvious that they talk across purposes. So let's take the cleanest one to begin with, which would be mathematics. In mathematics, what you mean by possibilities would be simply the laying out of the variables, the possible arguments and values that a variable can take, or all of the different values that can be represented in a system. Those are its possibilities. In the early work of Wittgenstein, Wittgenstein is, okay. So you know his work. It really divides into 3 periods, but it's most commonly seen as, or at least I don't know what people say today. It's been like when I was reading philosophy, trying to know everything. This was what the picture of Wittgenstein was. That you had the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, published in 1916, 1918, something like that. And the Philosophical Investigations, which was his book that was published just after he died. And nobody knew at that time that there were these dozens of other collections of fragments and all kinds of stuff. But the Tractatus basically has this notion that it's going to develop a system of possibilities. So it's one of its great propositions is there are no new possibilities. So possibilities is a very, very, very abstract level, and anything that could be combined into a proposition, be made part of a statement that represents or makes a picture of a state of affairs, would be a possibility. Perversely, he calls them facts. So in other words, the facts are combined into a state of affairs, and you have this vast, incredibly crystalline attempt to do in philosophy finally by generalizing over everything that could possibly be philosophy and show itself here. And to do it without needing an ontology, or without knowing it's an ontology. I mean, it's an ontology. Yeah, of course, it is a very powerful general ontology. But it has this one sense of possibility, and it's the possibility that works well with mathematics, because any different system of mathematics. Hi, by the way, I'm Chuck. That's you. What is your name? Huh? Okay. Hi. You can see that any given mathematical system is an arrangement of all of its own possibilities. The whole point of a mathematical system is that it should exhaust all of the possibilities of the things that are true within it, and that they all should be mutually entailed. In other words, if you have a system of geometry, it should be closed in the sense that you ought to be able to get from any theorem to all the others. For one theorem to be true, you need the entire set of undefined terms, definitions, axioms, and all the other propositions, and they're all. If there's any proposition that can be well formed within the system, that has been proved in one part and isn't entailed by all the others, the system is in trouble. And really, an enormous amount of labor in modern mathematics, at least in the early part of the 20th century, was to not only prove the theorems in a given system, but to prove that all the theorems within the system were consistent. So that you had not only proofs, but consistency proofs. And a proof, then you had to prove that the proof was consistent with all the others. An enormous enterprise that the great bomb dropped in the middle of that was the famous Gödel inconsistency theorem, which showed that systems couldn't quite do what they wanted to do, and so you always would be dealing with
either a system that was inconsistent or that was incomplete. That there would be things that you needed it for that you couldn't find by the deductive chains of its own construction. So there's that sense of possibility. The possibilities are all the theorems that can be generated within a given formal system. If it's say move that into computer science, it's algorithms and all of the statements that the system can contain. And you have the distinction between well-formed systems and proven systems and different levels in which the thing is organized. But all those things are possibilities. Now let's take possibilities in the sense that we ordinarily use them. You say, that's not possible. And you mean by that something slightly different, but related to this mathematical one. You say it's not possible, mean you can't do that. It can't happen. If it's possible, it can happen. So immediately you can see, if you wanted to read into reality a mathematical structure and say reality is like a mathematical structure, then you could see all the things that can happen as possibilities. Sort of.
Yeah, it's here. I'm thinking, like you could have two variables, x and y, and each can have the same function if they range over all the real numbers. You can say, so x ranges over all real numbers, y ranges over all real numbers. They have the same range. But then you put them together to say x is greater than y, and there's a difference in their values because they both range over the same areas. So they change their possibilities when they're put together.
All right, but that's still within a mathematical refinement
Yeah,
of it.
well, it seems like it's a matter of coordination.
Yeah, and if you're dealing with transfinite numbers, it starts getting very, very, very crazy.
But there's also the question of, naturally we say it all the time, like it's possible that happened, but what is that? What could that possibly mean? I can understand the conception of possibility referring to some future event, but referring to some past event.
Well, because the mathematical language is designed not to have a difference between past and future. It only has a difference between a statement that has been generated or not generated within a given discourse, and that's only accidentally temporal.
Yeah.
It's not. They all are ultimately mutually entailed, which means it doesn't matter when you actually have generated the sentence. Of course, that's not quite true in computer science because the machine has to actually have done it. And though you can have very fast and very many lines in an algorithm, you can't have an infinite number. So in mathematics, you can have an infinite number if your view of mathematics is a certain one. If you're a finitist, you can't. You can say that those things are have ferocious, murderous attitudes against people who believe that, who don't like each other, who have different views about the nature of the infinite. We'll come around to all that too, I think. However, there's a whole other sense of possibility, which, if you take it within an existential or even a phenomenology or something else, and this is maybe me, and it would come with a sense that, let's imagine an ontology in which there are two species of ways of talking about what is. One is facts, determinate, definable somethings, occurrences, events, perceptions, intuitions, something that's actual. And the other modality is possibility. Now, one could think facts are realizations or actualization of possibilities. You could think that. That would be a whole way of taking being. But you could invert that, and you could say facts are the matrix of possibilities. It's from facts that possibilities arise. So that at any given actual moment, under any given actual condition, there are two ways of taking what is. One is the facts, give me the facts. The other is the possibilities, the sense that whatever it is that you take as facts, they're a generatrix, they're a matrix, they're the mother of what is coming. And in a pragmatic sense, it's always infinitely more than what you can grasp by the facts. And if you just take quantum physics as a metaphor, not as more as a real, but just as a metaphor, the very model for the idea that you could treat even the future as facts, namely determinism, 19th century, 18th century, Laplacian determinate reality, the idea that if you had all of the facts and the correct laws of nature, you not only have the facts of the present, but you have the facts infinitely into the future and into the past. And there's no difference.
Computer model.
And you can run a computer model of the future if you have sufficient input. Yeah?
When possibilities are given, then how do we know we have the right facts or the accurate facts?
Well, if possibilities are infinite, but we didn't say that possibilities were infinite. I'm just saying that if we have the idea in Laplacian determinism is that if you have the facts and you have the laws, you can extrapolate from the facts to any point in the future. That's Laplacian determinism. Quantum physics was the model for that. The reason Laplace could say this, he was a physicist in late in the 18th century, early 19th century. He could make an ontology based on Newtonian physics. That was the idea. As Newtonian physics in the 100 or so years before him had only gotten better, gotten more and more refined, and covered more and more phenomena. It looked all the way up to many people, up until the end of the 19th century, that the physics was going to give you this complete deterministic picture of things are. So physics was the model for a philosophy. If we wanted a philosophy that had something that is bedrock, the tendency was to look to Newtonian physics. You know, the great Pope line, God created Newton and all was light. It's a couple. I forget what the first part was.
That's like physicalism.
Well, today we call it physicalism, and but up until a certain point, that was the only show in town, except for people who had to do a lot of work to. Nobody tried to get out of it. Everybody tried to situate it, except for somebody like William Blake said. Newton is the image of the bad God. Yeah. So, but with quantum physics, that's gone. There's no determinate relationship between the state of the possibilities, which are now read as probabilities. So possibility becomes in physics probability, or the relationship between possibility and probability. Right? So probability, you have a science of probability, an entire mathematical way of calculating the odds that something is going to happen. And it's always based on you being given the possibilities. The possibilities, and that's like the first set of possibilities that we're talking about. So you can calculate for any given possibility at any given moment in the future the probability that will occur. And that's all that physics could do. It could not give you a determinate picture of what's going to happen.
And the possibilities are generated by the facts.
They are all the facts. In other words, there is no probability. There's no possibility in the second sense that I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, it's based on the axioms of the system we're in.
Well,
The probabilities.
Well, in order to estimate the probabilities, you have to have some system in which you can represent them. And
You have to have something that's going to give us stability.
Well, something that's going to give the language stability. Because,
Well, actuarial science is just an example of statistical science. Statistical science is you work out the probabilities, and there is a philosophy. The philosophy of statistics is enormously important today because that is, I would say that it's our default ontology is information, probability, statistics. That's what we have. It's not materialism in the usual sense because matter's gone to hell. We don't even know what it is. We know we don't have it all. All we know is that in order for the laws to work, there's not enough of the matter that we can see to confirm them. So we're in a very strange position on that score alone in relationship to the physicalist universe. And so we're way out there. We're in a state of huge agnosticism. We're in a kind of agnostic state, much more so than ever before. I mean, maybe once before quantum physics solidified. You got on the one hand, the most powerful material scientific system ever in quantum physics. On the other hand, what that is in relationship to a total ontology is more unknown than ever. So we have I've been saying since Madoff and the president of the economic universal debacle that the entire Western intellect is a Ponzi scheme. Because you start with the idea that you're going to sort of shove under the rug and postpone, defer the ultimate questions. Because you've got enough to look at right in front of your nose, and so let's look at it all.
You're giving enough return that people are satisfied.
Satisfied with it.
Yeah.
But I think we've gotten to the end of that being satisfied, that the blank check that we wrote to our scientists to postpone the question of what it's all about is come due. It's like, it's sort of obvious that the more we know, the harder it is to see what it's all locked up into. We have a universe with 100 billion galaxies, each with 100 billion stars. You can see right to the edge of what? Not the edge of it, but to the edge of the observable universe. We only know it has an edge, and there's nothing we can say about what contains it, except by inventing incredible speculations to explain other things that we can't explain, which then gives us ideas about how to talk about what the whole thing might be inside of. It's a kind of, it's a new zoo. It's not like any prior ignorance. It's a new form of ignorance.
I'm thinking that possibility that that's probability is in relation to what is possible. So if you have a possible state of events, and probability tells you what those events are. But doesn't that just push the question further back?
Of course. Let's just say
realize the possibility.
Well, if you say so. You have a picture in which you're going to allow your ontology to be the relationship between probability, possibility, and actuality. You've got three nice metaphysical terms, and you can run things through that, and you get a certain sense of how things are if you look at it that way. But it's all because that's what you're saying. What are the axioms that allow a thing to get going? What are the distinctions? What are the assertions that hold things still for a moment, so you can let things come into a configuration? One of my ideas that I'm working with now, apart from the idea that all things are Ponzi scheme, is, because it really is. It's like the debt gets bigger and bigger. And the ability to pay it off gets pushed further and further away because there are more and more and harder. We now have, in order to understand the most successful model of material universes, the so-called standard model,
with this one little piece that's missing that they spend billions and billions of dollars to smash protons against each other in the hope that they're going to either prove or disprove the existence of this thing, which is the key to the whole system. And half of them are hoping they disprove it so that they can, oh boy, and start again from scratch. Did you ever see that George Carlin thing about dogs? He's talking about how the dog, when you're coming home, the dog is saying, oh boy, he's coming. More problems. Or that you'll finally get this Higgs particle, which is now going to make it possible to, and there are so many variations on what the Higgs field is, and it's, it's basically to understand why the values of the masses of the fundamental particles are what they are. So there's this entire schema that makes the so you've got this whole thing locked up. But in order to understand what that is, and to understand what the quarks are, and why the different fields that the different forces are distributed through, you have to calculate a world of reality which is in principle impossible ever to perceive. Not logically impossible, but because the energies that you would have to generate in order to perceive them are greater than the entire energy that exists in the observable universe. So, I mean, this is the string theory, the variations on the string theories, and what all that involves. So it just gets more and more arcane and more remote that it's ever going to be possible to decide on that basis. So, you have an entire industry of people who are doing string theory, and another industry that's basically ignoring it and do it some other way, resolve the anomalies and the contradictions between the different aspects of basically relativity and quantum physics, because they have a totally different ontology in relationship to space. Yeah.
I just have two comments. First, I'm kind of curious how chaos theory builds into or relates to what you're talking about, probability. At least how I understand it, you don't have to study it definitely, at least the way I understand it is you'll have a system with a certain amount of probabilities for, however long, and then all of a sudden it'll just collapse and turn into something.
Right, that's
in a very, very rough description.
Yeah, well, that's you're really talking about catastrophes.
Yeah.
Okay, so a catastrophe is a generalized mathematical description of something that happens in particular kinds of material systems, where a certain measurable phenomena can be measured continuously up until it reaches a certain point, and then the whole phenomenon changes. So the obvious ones are phase changes in, say, water molecules. So you have the water, the gas, H2O molecules up down to a certain temperature don't connect with each other. They just move like around the ocean. When the amount of heat is withdrawn below a certain threshold, they start connecting. They have water molecules. When it goes down below another threshold, they form these crystals. So those would be the 212 Fahrenheit to 32 degrees Fahrenheit would be catastrophe points. Catastrophe just means that something gives a radical turn, changes. Yeah, no, sure. I mean, it's like, cool. All right, so in other words, there are loads and loads of different things in nature, at a biological level, at a physical level, all the different chemical levels, where this kind of discontinuity occurs. So things running along, pop. So the catastrophe theory is that's the beginning, really, of this kind of mathematics that gives you chaos theory and what's generally called far from equilibrium thermodynamics and complexity theory, all these different things. Catastrophe theory was the mathematical generalizations of the different ways in which catastrophe points can form. There's different models. There was a book that came out in the 70s by Hello. I'm in the middle of talking to people in this thing that I'm here to talk to people about in this thing. Now I called you last night. Did you know? I called you on your cell phone because it was too late and I didn't want to wake your dad. So you did on my cell? Huh? I didn't get it. Obviously my phone was ringing. I don't know where it was. Anyway, I'll call you a little later. I promise. Okay, bye. Should I turn it off or is this entertaining? Everybody gone?
Well, okay. That was the end of the class.
Oh.
Now we do the restaurant.
Oh, okay. Bye.
We're still here.
So now I'll tell you the secret that you could be very quiet. No, not the universe. I mean, we've almost gotten to the point to saying we've lost the universe. I mean, the word in the mid-20th century, existence seemed like, up until the day before yesterday, existence seemed like a pretty solid thing. Either existence meant the universe or existence meant bedrock of human experience, depending on whether you were a materialist or an existentialist or something. But to try to tell me what existence means today, you can't, the word doesn't even have a reference. Because experience has been defragulated by yeah, okay, no, but let's say, okay, what exists is this chair, what exists is this institution that we're sitting in a space in, existence is your experience. Yeah, but this is the point is, do you want to do Wittgenstein on it and say it doesn't matter? There's no connection between the two except our use?
Or do you it's all the facts?
Or it's all the facts, but we've already said that you can look at existence in terms of possibility first, rather than that what you can, it's a difference in attitude, and it's a spiritual difference. If you switch yourself from saying I'm going to take what's real as the way facts generate possibilities, or I'm going to take what's real the way facts illustrate possibilities, two different directions. And you're going to live differently if you switch your attitude.
Yeah. What you were saying earlier about some people working with string theory, some people not working with string theory, whatever, pretending like both.
No, it's not quite like that, but pretty good. Yeah, pretty close.
I would imagine in some pockets of the academic community.
Oh, I'm sure it's vast. I only know.
Yeah, and I think that probably goes for all professions, no matter what issue.
Well, it's another part of the Ponzi scheme is that it's impossible. It gets more and more impossible to have anything like a canvassing picture of the whole, except by pure poetry.
But what I wanted to say was, I guess, one, ask if you're familiar with the hacker historian Eric Raymond.
No.
He wrote this essay called "The Cathedral and the Bazaar," which really
In the bazaar and the bazaar, in the bazaar or
the cathedral and the
bazaar. Okay.
Where he basically observed the Linux development community when it first started in the early 90s, having been pretty much his entire life, let's say a guy who was very much about a single institution working on a problem, especially a really complex one, which would be a singular institution, many people with their hands in the pot. But he observed this different type of development and then applied it, to his own projects, and found that when you stop building up these cathedrals of information, hoarding information, that you were actually able to problem solve much more rapidly, much more efficiently. You ended up having to do less work yourself, and the work actually.
But what is it that you said you stopped doing? Building up the complex hierarchy that organize the information in the system.
Yeah.
And so what did it do instead? Multi-center networks or what?
Well, kind of like the difference between having, let's say a congregation in a cathedral where, everyone shows up and you look at the guy in the front, they all listen to exactly what he has to say about whatever it is they're talking about. They all recall. Instead of that, you have, literally a certain capacity where everyone's going around talking about everyone, trading freely. I guess maybe not being afraid to see what the other guys are doing, and not being afraid for the other guy to critique.
Open source.
Yeah, yes. This is like the archetypical open source method.
You want to talk about the present? That was Ducati Park.
Yes. Yeah, to a certain extent.
Well, I'm saying that was the energy. That's what people felt. What it's become and so on.
But at the same time, there was still that cathedral building that went out between near the 99%, and that's the 1%.
Yeah, but that actually wasn't the deal. The deal was that it did have that potential. But after the park stopped being there, and it's when all of us left, it's the place that people communicate outside. In the park, it's not that it didn't run into problems, but the problems of it are that's worked out. So that's an idealistic view.
I guess it's an idealistic view, but when are you here to join us? Talking about just absolute information, where all the bits and structure
Absolute information.
unable to function. They make a reward if they don't. But it seems like a very interesting development or change of methodology. It's a little bit different than I've done it.
Okay, but maybe it has something to do with what I'm saying, is that you don't fixate on the facts and reduce them into structures. You use the facts to open possibilities.
Maybe what I think you don't fixate on having the correct ontology. Ever having that point of correctness again.
Correctness could be completely pragmatic and relative.
Yeah.
Business at least with this Alex saying that probably the best way to look at
the party is something
is that we create a mathematical model for its description. That's how we want to have
it just came out, and we just started to die.
any number of different descriptions within any definition. And so
But not just as well for the same purpose.
Well, yeah.
So suddenly purpose enters into it at a site which is different from the way it was traditionally. Because you're recognizing that you can't actually have a model without that model being biased towards something. Even the attempt to have no bias is going to be relative to the conditions under which you're doing it and the desire to have such a model. For the most part, you're making the model for some reason. Okay, now this brings us to the secrets. We got lots,
It's so early in the day.
yeah, the secrets were there before we woke up. We were already talking about ontologies in the plural. And I tried to raise this question about we don't know what existence is, and you didn't quite let me get to spelling out the different senses of existence and doing the Platonic thing of asking, do they have a common? meaning. So I was saying, we can build a Wittgenstein way in which we don't ask that question. In fact, you have a taboo against that question. If you read like the Blue and Brown books or any of the late Wittgenstein, the attitude is only the dumb philosophers will ask this question. But it turns
isn't that kind of like what Buddha is 10, useful, very useless
questions, yeah. All right, but it's still a legislation. It's taking place within the context of what this we should do. Who the hell is this we? What do you mean we, white man? Who is to tell another what the human collective is? If you're going to have the bizarre, you don't get to say what we should do. You can say what we should do if you give advice about some pragmatic reason why we should think this way. But the big we, the Kantian we, the idea that you can't be intelligent without speaking for everybody, is hold that in suspense for a while. But the question of asking whether a group of questions that have a common term have a common thought shouldn't be something that you refuse to think about. Okay, so I'm just saying, we used to think we knew that existence seemed pretty solid. You could say, come on, in the real world, and you would mean by that usually the universe or something about human experience. But the bedrock of human experience has been defragulated by deconstruction, by showing that there are all kinds of important real things which you can't make part of your experience. You can think about, create concepts for them, but you can't experience language as such, according to the Saussurean motto. It can't be made an object of presence. So both of those senses of existence have gotten fuzzy. The mathematical sense of existence is a big chunk of it, because if you do any mathematics at all, you know that a huge part of it has to do with existence statements. Backwards E. There exists an X for Y, for all, so you have these two bedrock quantifiers in mathematics, which becomes mathematical logic, and holds the whole system. For all something, or there exists a something. What's that exist?
Well, I don't know. Are you familiar with Graham Priest?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I just finished his book, Towards Not Being. But in there, he's talking about the loaded question of existence. That the operator includes the predicate since it is placed most of the questions. And then for everything that exists, it has to exist.
Okay, now, all of that, including Priest, goes back to Mr. Aristotle, who says to exist is to be one. And that, the arch of that really is all the way to Quine, where to exist means to be the valuable variable. We use the word existence in that way. We use the word being. In fact, throughout most of the tradition, being is used that way. That you mean by being what something is. By what you mean, this brings us into all the way up to something. Being qua existence. Being qua existence. No, being qua identity. So you would say the being of the chair is, if you're a Platonist, you say it's the form of the chair. If you're an Aristotelian, you say it's the criteria by which you can say whether something is a chair. So the being is that sense of identity. It means you have a concept for it. It means you can define the set to which it belongs.
I was going to say, there recently read an essay about this on Garcia. Doesn't he answer the question of being differently, that it's not how we can define the thing, that it is only its relationship.
Let's hold our guardian up. He's knocking on the door for sure. We'll do the whole of the guardian.
He's the open the door.
He's the whole of the door, yeah. No, because that has another pragmatic side, is because if you read the Gargano as if he's a philosopher, without asking the question about Eliot and philosophy, what's your involvement here? You're missing the whole point that the Gargano is about life. It has a particular. Well, we're going to keep mopping up the mess we're making piece by piece. No, one of the messes we didn't mop up is just to hold back to some of the physics question, is that what are the different? I mean, this is really pop stuff. I read like people read novels. I read novels and physics. Some not so pop, but I read them so that I actually learn a little bit more each time. But you do have, huh?
Like Brian.
Well, I read them all. Yeah, they're useful. Of course, there's all kinds of stuff in there. He's kind of nuts. I mean, the end of the last book is one of these. You can really see these like really smart guy who just allows himself to spin off in crazy land. Nice, but it's fun, crazy land. It's worth actually following those arguments about the different kinds of multiverses and all that. But no, so you have Brian Greene has become a pop star. He had a television show or videos and whatnot. He wrote three books. I can't see that he probably does very much physics. But maybe not, and he's got a decent editor, so maybe. The going thing for those books, for the most part, is you lose 10,000 readers for every mathematical formula you put in, and you have basically people who dumb them down. So you have this amazing book like this Yao, the guy who did the Calabi-Yau manifold. That's kind of one of the important things in string theory. So he writes a book about the whole history of that thing, and actually almost tries to get you to understand it, except it's obvious that he got a real idiot for a guy to write the book for him. There's no way that he could sound like the guy in that book. It just doesn't make any sense at all. No, but okay, so you have a typical anti-string theory that really gives you a sense of it is Smolin's, a book called The Trouble with Physics, which is a kind of, it's largely a sociological analysis of the coercion that graduate students had been in to go into string theory at a time when there were other possibilities and they were being simply ignored. They couldn't get funding and jobs and so on. And so there's the feeling that there are other ways of dealing with the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem being resolving on the one hand, the contradiction between quantum physics and relativity physics and the concept of space, whether it's continuous or discrete, and the other being bringing the gravity into coherence with the forces. What you have to do to do that, and there are other propositions that are out there that are worth studying in string theory that might actually be something that you can add on to some ends without having fundamentally destroyed the basic principle of physics that's made it work for 300 years, which is that you don't allow an experiment to get too far ahead of theory, and you don't allow theory to get too far ahead of an experiment.
Like you try to develop an example?
No. That was a far out one that worked. I mean,
but it wasn't QM. Quantum mechanics. Wasn't it quantum?
No, Bell inequality is a consequence of quantum mechanics. The Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen thought experiment was supposed to disprove quantum mechanics or show that quantum mechanics was incomplete because the consequence of a piece of it was absurd. And what Bell chose was show how you could make it not look absurd, and then the people actually created experiments which demonstrated that it was true. It was absurd.
I was reading very low when this year was talking about an alternative QAnon.
It's not from them. There may be alternative. Well, I don't know. Anyway, so I'm just saying that that's an example of you know what I'm talking about. You know, the development inequality is huh? Yeah. I mean, we could go with that, but that's that's infra physics is definitely one of the weirder things that is true. The thing that makes it so people think you actually have teleportation that actually occurs on the level of tiny little things. They haven't actually got entanglement. Yeah, of course. Non-locality, entanglement. That's the Bell inequality is the proposition that develops that was able to test it. Anyway, so that's an example of something which was a far out. In quantum physics, this was a far out consequence, which actually was eventually testable. But the string theory things, they don't even imagine that they can test them, because what happens is, in order to the smaller the entity, the more energy it actually confines. So in order to crack apart the particles small enough to get things down at the level of the strings, you need more energy than there is in the universe to actually smash the two together. Have you ever seen that before?
Is this like the reverse consequence of the speed of light?
No. It's got to do with the simple fact that the smaller the vibration, the higher the frequency, the smaller the wavelength, the more energy it holds. Energy is proportional to frequency.
Yeah, and the Planck constant.
And the Planck constant, but the strings are practically at the Planck scale.
Oh, okay.
See, so in order to break something apart so that you would see those, you need such an incredible amount of energy because the objects are. If you ever, there's an amazing thing that's been circulating on a scale where they actually give you. Have you seen this? It's a black box. It gives you images, like you're showing on a telescope, zooming down through something, and you start with the entire observable universe, and you get to the different galactic superclusters and galactic clusters of the galaxy, and the solar system, the neighboring stars of the solar system, and the human scale, the cellular scale, and the atomic scale, and the scale of the protons, and the scale of the quarks, and then almost as far away down as all of the rest of it to get to the string theory. So you can get an impression of a scalar situation. So anyway, so you have a small instance of a physicist who did work in string theory. He doesn't say string theory is evil or that shouldn't be there or isn't a part of it. He has a kind of, but he's saying that nonetheless, it's part of the screwed up sociology of the academic economics that has weighted some amount. And he gives examples of other group theory and
consciousness behaviors.
it always happens all the time.
They just had an article in the New York Times in the last week or two where they did a study on how many
retractions. Yeah, no, that's another matter.
And
I read that
over the last 10 years, it's grown like.
Yeah, right. So anyway, there's all kinds of aspects of the sociology and science policy. But anyway, that's one thing. A whole other question is a view of physics that came into being beginning with Prigogine and the development of complexity theory and the view that we should rethink the whole question of what physics is from this hierarchy that's based on scale, And this idea that you have sequences, a series of reductions, so you reduce.
Getting rid of Aristotle's
No, it's just that, you know, if you in my book, you know, in the book that I've given you, the basic picture is biology, psychology is biology, biology is chemistry, chemistry is atom physics is particle physics, and each layer you're getting deeper and deeper, and so there's fundamental science is the deeper you go. But what the complexity theorist people argue is that there are identifiable, that's a mathematically identifiable patterns which are scale independent, so that you can find patterns of morphogenesis, of the arising of patterns, of forms.
So there are forms, there are time forms.
Well, the thing is that what it no, it's Buckminster Fuller is about particular forms. He's interested in forms. He's an engineer. He steals stuff from mathematics and applies it. So that's what it is. It's not, you know, actually the great, it's very interesting. Probably the most important geometer of the 20th century, Tunxis, basically hated for it, just felt he was a plagiarist. All of these things that he presented like his discoveries were, in fact, just taking things out of geometry textbooks. Right, it isn't to the side. I don't agree, but it's interesting. There is this kind of record. But all I'm saying is that the people who are interested in this kind of morphogenesis, a general morphogenesis, say that physicists shouldn't be biased to this hierarchy of scale. And there's a new kind of physics which would have to do with understanding how forms occur under given, the probability of the emergence of given forms.
Forms.
Well,
I accept like an emergence, like say we can't talk about consciousness in the level of physics, but we're going to be able to talk about it at some emergent level.
yeah, well, actually, I think that's a big problem. I really disagree with that.
Really?
Yeah, I think that the analogy between, for instance, the emergence of life among organic molecules to the idea that consciousness is emergent in that sense is misguided. No, I know that's what.
Like liquid is emergent.
No, I know. I'm saying that's the argument. The going argument is that in some sense, consciousness, sentience. I think sentience is the best word. Is because consciousness gets confused with intelligence. So, say awareness or sentience. There's some sentience. Yeah, that sentience is emergent exactly in that sense. That when a certain degree of complexity is reached, say, among the neuronic tissue, it becomes sentient. And it seems to me that there's a fallacy there. The fallacy is that in all forms of emergent form, whether it's phase changes in simple substances or the emergence of the complex of criteria that you would call life, the emergent properties, though not predictable from the base from which it emerged, are nonetheless observable. Consciousness is not observable. The only way you can observe consciousness is in something that is indistinguishable from its absence, on the one hand, or what you have yourself.
I think this actually brings me to a thought I had much earlier that I think we've been pointing out, especially in the idea of Derrida's different models, ability to kind of see the patterns, but at the same time it gets diffracted so that you still have something you're not quite grasping. And that playing into, what's going on in science. reminds me of, the Zen teaching that whenever you start talking about who am I, every time you talk about the I, you're trying to point to something. It's always just as the tip of the finger. Yeah. And your eyes try and cross.
We'll get there. No, really. I mean, I should.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna get going.
Okay. Well, you could go too. I'll just keep talking to myself.
I don't know. It's okay.
Try to make it back.
What's your name? What? Jesse? John. Nice to meet you.
Still having
Yeah, that's fine. It's fine. Yeah, we're still gonna have a meeting too. Whether you decide to stick around.
Yeah, I should.
Stuff some bagels in your pocket.
Well, I hope you'll still be around too, because
Yeah, I'll
I'm
be
still
around.
not very sensitive to the possibility.
Yeah,
I want to get back. There's
no,
another question I had on
yeah.
propositions.
Well, I want to get to what we can do with ontology, because that's I'm a Buddhist Parmenidean, and I think.
Well, you call me pretentious.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I didn't say I wasn't either.
No, I mean, that's Parmenidean is the.
It's all the same thing.
It's the reformed. I met a guy in California a few months ago. We decided that we would reform a society called Heideggerians, or reluctant Heideggerians.
Labs.
No, not labs. No. But like reform, post-Heideggerian, that you. I mean, what becomes possible through Heidegger is a refocusing on Parmenides, and if you really stay with that for 20 years,
You have.
really,
You say that.
I did. Yeah, that's what's worth.
Once you get over the river, you eventually get far anyway, which
The river becomes. Okay, now go away.
Come back.
Well, was the different attitudes about what physics might be? Was just sort of like writing out that.
Yeah,
If you take a philosophy class, you'll get very frustrated.
Yeah.
Because even though it's a rigorous course, it's not a
scalar form,
So we should talk about.
you see the same form
I'm gonna recommend
pattern
Would you consider doing my creative writing class in the fall?
through different subjects.
Well, let's make a distinction. Of course,
I don't think I'd rather.
recognizing
The only thing I was
cross
thinking about
is one. But the thing in complexity theory is within physical phenomena, which
Sasha's played
show
The same emergent pattern.
the same
Because
emergent
honestly, I think what you'll find the good
conditions.
class was that
There's a book by Tunxis and somebody else.
I might be wasting your time, but I don't know if that's my overall sense. My world religions class in the spring, I think,
That would
What arises background or stars.
I have to sort of.
That's just endless. I mean, well, philosophy class could be endless too. Just a kind of intuition. Get more done. Just kind of get into
Collective social phenomena or in the cosmos. So you're now really looking at what everyone likes to say, but which is in fact.
I stopped writing.
Is it already over?
You're both excellent. It's great talk. You're just working.
Now, of course, how does it? Because of a natural law already. A natural law is already involves that process. Well, how is a natural law has a faith in how things really are? You know, if you're purely
Tuesday,
you don't
extra
believe that the
1:30 Congress Hall,
description for today that you're a laborious
Over here,
Both of us.
kind of the the person of choice of these find tremendous principal subject in the last 20 years. Really, these translations of these fragments are excellent. Yeah, so if you go to Charles Stein, he has all of his notes on these translations. Get him to talk about that, about the Iliadic stuff. He's really good at that.
Yeah, and because maybe the problem I've run into doesn't say that, the problem I've run into is, okay, then, this thought we're having is just, a sequence of neurons firing in the brain.
Is.
What do you mean is?
You said is.
Yeah.
This thing appearance we're having is the sequence of neurons firing.
Yeah.
So somehow the sentience, quality, the phenomenon, the quality, the actual experience is identical with this thing that you don't experience at all. I mean, that's one view of it. You have this radical, but you're saying
there.
because you said it. You said this thing that I'm experiencing is the neural phenomenon, the neural.
Yeah.
So it is that.
But I guess the pattern that we're talking about, those emergent patterns that, you're saying order on the top. Well, I can only have a thought of those. I can't really see them so much to a certain extent. Or they're patterns that are forming right now in this very moment that I cannot directly point to. But which I experience anyway.
I was just saying that the actual law, the claim that there is a law of conservation of energy, all of these different, the constants of nature, the relationship between the mass of an electron and a proton, the fine structure constant, all of these different the constants, plus the laws that establish the relationships among them. E equals mc squared. Take these things. These are very powerfully stated general concepts.
Yeah.
And we think we understand them.
But I would say the physicalist position against saying there's a form that is just that you're observing that pattern. But that doesn't.
The Platonist who says there is a form. I'm using Platonist in a very specific sense, not necessarily that you can have a direct intuition.
Okay, fair enough.
But just in some sense, where Aristotle and Plato are corrections of each other. That, in other words, there are circumstances in which the Aristotelian understanding of a non-separable form seems to get the sense of it better, where the separation of the forms. So there's never those two views. But nonetheless, if there is a concept, okay, so this is where I want to say that the best we have done in understanding what a concept is. Now, what we mean by that, what I mean by that is what? If you have a concept of a given object, let's start with the first thing. What you mean is you can hold in a single thought that which makes it possible to recognize an object that belongs under that concept. I understand what a chair is. On the one hand, you can say, well, it's something I can sit on.
I wasn't really thinking about it.
Well, okay, but the point is that if because certainly there are
we're using, you know, all the way back to the beginning, this is what allows us to hold and read.
yes, but what's a noun? Do you acknowledge that there are nouns?
Yes.
Well, no, it could be anything that you it's a name for something. So I'm just saying that a noun is the most concrete sense of what a concept is, and what a noun does is it gives a name to a set.
Okay.
No, I'm not gonna say that there isn't a critique of concepts. I'm not saying that set theory is even true. I think there are fundamental problems with it. Without Wittgenstein. Yeah, okay. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Okay.
Yeah.
But when you say refers to set, though, you're referring to that, you want to take that line and break it into infinite parts.
Sure, you can have subsets.
Exactly. Okay.
You can have members and you can have subsets. The two aspects of sets are that a given set from a given set, you can separate off another set if you have a criteria for doing so. That's an axiom of set theory. Well, the axiom of separation. You have a given set, and you have a criteria to make a new set by separating off those members of the set. You have all the different criteria.
Putting those in, or we're putting those in?
We're just doing sets. Sets have sets, and they have, and the main operation, I mean, basically verb is, in this language, verb is an operation. There are all kinds of complications for that. But the main operation in set is the formation of a set. You create from the set another set. Or you have sets that exist by calculation. There is an empty set. Stipulated in the axiom. We're talking about a particular set. One axiom.
I mean, that's a lot, but.
Well, I don't know what it is. I don't even know what it is. The last one was not. We have a lot of shit going on, so we really just hit
Okay, so you can separate. So now this is very important.
There's nothing. So it's not.
In Aristotle, all the way to Wittgenstein. What we really want to say is that a set is simply the things that are in it. The concept, the criterion that allows you to say what's there, apart from pointing to the ones that are actually there, is something that, in addition, that you don't need. You just have the criterion. The criterion is not a form that has a kind of being that's separate from the things that come under the criterion. That's the extreme empiricist anti-Platonic view. It's called extensionality. You have a notion of set that it's pure extensionality. A set is simply its members. You have we're just talking about the sets. You can have operators, but don't forget about those. You can take the union of two sets. You can make subsets. You can do various different things with the sets. There are other axioms that stipulate that you can do that. But just the set itself, understand what the set is. You can define a set, and this is called the axiom. And it says an axiom is its members. The membership is undefined. Undefined term, what it means. Sets, and a sets of you have an axiom that says set is its members. But you have another axiom that says if you have a given set and you have a criteria, you can separate off set the members that satisfy that criteria. That's called the axiom of separation. And that's another understanding of a set. It's saying a set can be defined not by the members that are in it, but by the definition that tells you what the objects have in common. In other words, you say, okay, this room is the set of chairs. And we have a criteria. If you see a chair and it's pink, that forms a subset out of the original set. It's black, horizontal, you have a criteria. And that pinkness is something that you can hold in mind without actually looking at all the different chairs. So you have a notion of a set that's formed by having a criteria, and you have another notion that's formed by simply identifying them. And I'd say that those two concepts are, they very cleverly build into set theory both the anti-Platonic position and the Platonic position. The Platonic one is the one that's, or Platonic solution. The one that says you can separate off a set.
Oh, that one? That's all mixed.
Different kinds.
Chicken salad, ham, roast beef, turkey.
It's not just the same thing as the numbers. It's just at the level of the definition of what sets are. And I'm just saying that within a set theory, there's this fudging of the question of whether there is something in addition to the members. So I'm saying, okay, then you have this notion of the empty set. The empty set is a set that has no members. So in the notion of what I'll call the intentional definition, that's the axiom of separation. It's using this medieval scholastic term. You'd say that a term has an extension, which means all the things that the terms cover, and it has an intension, which is its form or its definition. So the term has an intention, which is its meaning, its definition, its the image, and it has an extension, which is all the things that come under it. So that's for a term, but here a term, a concept, set are all interconnected. That you can get on to talk about the differences, but they're more or less all the same in that way.
I don't think definitely needs to.
It's a red light. I think maybe the recording part is on, but not the attached to the speakers. Anyway, it helps.
I'm just saying you don't have to keep it.
No, okay.
Wizardry, I guess.
Okay, so we have an extensional definition and an intentional definition. One is called the axiom of extension that says a set is its members, and an intentional definition, which is the axiom of separation, which says if you've got a set, you can separate off the things that come under the criteria. And I'm saying that in those two definitions, you're actually fudging this philosophical question about whether there really is something that's different from the specific things that constitute the collections. So in other words, one notion of a set is it's just a collection. One notion of a concept is it's just a collection. Another notion is there's this other thing called the mind that holds concept. It doesn't hold all the stuff that collected under it. You can think things, and you can call those words. I say not all words, nouns. Nouns do that. So you can have under the word dog, all the dogs that exist, all the dogs that ever existed, all the imaginary dogs, all the dogs that will exist. You know, but the word dog has all of those different possible usages. And of course, under a given circumstance, there are limitations on the usage. So if I say, see that dog, I'm not thinking of all that stuff. But if I don't think that the word is the same as the dog, and I separate it off, the dog comes charging, and I say, look out for the dog. You won't look out for the dog because you're looking in your head to see the difference between the word and the dog. So that's another statement. Okay, now, set theory. The empty set. The empty set is a very interesting notion because it says that you can have a concept without any members, without any objects. And it stipulates that there's only one empty set. That from the point of view of set theory, the absence of lions is the same thing as the absence of chairs. So in a sense,
I really want to make a point about
no. Hey, the reflection on the relationship between East and West. One point of the reflection is the relationship between God and the Guardian and Satan. And
yeah, because I mean, he says everything is empty. So
well, it means if you don't see that empty is empty, it's you're incurable.
Yeah, but it's
if you create a philosophy out of a guardian of
all things.
No, yeah, okay, yeah. Let's get the set theory clear before we get to either Parmenides on one side or Guardian on the same side. So, in a certain sense, an empty set, it gives you a very pure sense of a concept. It's a concept which without either a particular Platonic form that you're holding in your mind independent of its members, and without the members. Just conceptness is given in a sense by the empty set. Okay, so now you have three coordinate notions here. You have the notion that the set is just its members, the notion that the set is a criteria which determines its members, and that it's this pure something that doesn't have to have either a criteria or members in order for you to grasp what it is. Oh yeah, well, you mean the Japanese, the Kyoto school, a bit, years ago.
He had what? Essay, I think, called Moving Nothingness in East to West or something like that. But I mean, he set up an absolutized triangle, three different conceptions of reality, or maybe both. One is for the Aristotelian approach, one is ought for the continent, and the other is move for the one in the garden.
Well, we can look at those.
Well, but I mean, that's essentially what you're setting up, though. Is one
there's no ought in the set theory.
But that I would somewhat make the case that that's what the characteristics of the set. That each member of the set ought to look like this, even though that's going to be one characteristic of those objects that we're actually talking about reality. You can have many green things, but they're all not going to be the same thing, which you can still count them as set of green things.
Well, that's what concepts do. Yeah, that's the whole thing. But the empty set is interesting because it seems like, and if you're going to get to Alan Matthew, he's going to do another
Okay.
All right. Now, the set theorists, basically what they've done all this for is to generate arithmetic. And the way they generate arithmetic is they take the empty set as they stipulate that the empty set will stand for 0. The set that contains only the empty set itself as a set is the number 1. That's the way it's going to go. But that's not where I'm going to go. I'm going to go to something weirder. I'm going to prove that 0 equals 1.
Well, that's essentially what they just project.
But within the system. Okay, so what they say, basically the one operation they have is that you can always make a new set by containing whatever set you have. You can make a new concept by having the prior object as a member.
But then it will have to be 1 more.
That'll be 1 more. So in other words, 0, the empty set is 0. The set that has only the empty set as its member. The set that has the empty set and the set that contains the empty set, that's 2. And then using simply the operations that are allowed in set theory, you can generate arithmetic. I will do that very well. Except now, by the axiom of extension, the empty set is identical with nothing. By the axiom of separation, it's identical with 1. But just let's take the axiom of extension. By the axiom of extension, if you write the empty set is usually given like a Scandinavian 0 with a slash. So you'll have a blank space to represent actual nothing. And we'll put an equal sign. They stipulate that they're equivalents. There is such a thing as equivalence, which is another huge ontological thing. But blank space equals 0 with a slash.
Is that axiom itself the axiom curve?
Well, the empty set is defined as the set with no members. By extension, the set with no members is the same thing as nothing, since the set is equivalent to its membership. It has no members. That's nothing. Okay. So blank space is nothing. Sign for the empty set is the empty set. Equivalence says what I just demonstrated. Okay, now let's make the set that contains only the empty set, which is you have brackets with the 0, with the empty sign inside it. But the empty sign inside it is equivalent to nothing. So we can take out the sign. Now we just have the brackets.
Which is more than we had before.
But the brackets, but the content of that is nothing. So it isn't anything more.
I understand you.
All I'm
I
saying
didn't really want to make a joke about now the emptiness has a value.
Yeah, but there it is, that's simply an act. And it's the act that is the entire set theory, and it's the entire question of the creation of concepts.
You're saying the act of creating a value
What is it? It either makes 0 or 1. Either way. The creation of a concept is either nothing or it's 1. It's either nothing or something.
Can't be both at the same time.
Well, that's the Darjanan.
So,
Which is to say, because Darjanan's whole method is logic. It's his own version of logic. So all it does is that vitiates your commitment to concepts. That's the whole point. Okay. So now, if you take all of mathematics as reducible to set theory, which is the purpose of set theory, of pre-Gödelian, really pre-Russellian universe, all of these, the whole point of set theory, why did they invent set theory? It came from 2 different directions. One was the attempt at the end of the 18th century to rationalize calculus by giving a positive understanding to infiniteness as a limit process. Why? Well, George Cantor is the next. No, but Weierstrass, Cantor was a student of Weierstrass. And Cantor was developing the implications of Weierstrass's understanding of trigonometry. And so he raises the question about the number of points on a line. That's Cantor. And he has what he thinks is a proof, which everybody who goes this way goes crazy. Well, it's interesting whether he go crazy or exactly what. I mean, he certainly went crazy.
You either go crazy or you go very lucid.
Well, he did go crazy, but it isn't clear that it was his theory that made him crazy, or the fact that there were these finitists who wouldn't give him a job in a decent school. I think that's what made him crazy. Well, he was stuck in an outback in Holland and couldn't get a job in Berlin or not. Pool table somewhere on the show. So he demonstrates that the number of well, I mean, we need to go this way. I mean, it's like the two directions are transfinite number theory and Russell's paradox. That's the great one. Russell, Gottlob Frege, he was the German logician who was trying to fulfill a desire that had been percolating from the 19th century of deriving arithmetic from logic.
Yeah.
And he had completed his book and had sent proofs of it to us. And Russell finds a contradiction. Russell says there are two kinds of sets. There are sets that can contain themselves as members of themselves. For instance, the set of all sets is itself a set.
Okay, so that's like a recursive.
What we today call a recursive set. The whole world of recursive mathematics partly developed from this. Those things were already very recursive. This is part of the study. There are other sets, like the set of all chairs, which itself is not a chair. I mean, intuitively, from this, just starting out, it seems like there are those differences. There are sets that contain themselves, you know, or the set of ordinary objects. Well, just call them ordinary sets and self-reflective. Anyway, call them whatever you like. The question is the set of all the normal sets a set that includes simply all the ordinary sets? Set of them? Huh? The set of all the ordinary sets. Now, the set of all non-recursive sets that you think are non-recursive is the set that includes all the non-recursive sets. Is that set a recursive set? And if you wake up every morning and ask yourself that question and following it through, you will see every day if you say it's a member of itself, it's not a member of itself. If you say it's not a member of itself, it is a member of itself. That's the paradox. It's the best paradox that anybody's come up with since the lie about it.
This is interesting too, because this is quite the paradox. I think
Let's Oh, there's shit here.
Oh,
What's in these things?
Yeah, but what? Yesterday I was reading on the garden.
Right.
It's basically making the case that
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I'm not really that.
Nagarjuna is pointing out much earlier than Anima.
Then who?
Is there, what's today? Monday, is there a meeting today?
There's like a 6-hour thing today.
A 6-hour thing.
Yeah, with this guy.
You're looking at it.
Oh, okay, are we coming to that?
Today at 2, we're having a meeting in here anyways.
Okay.
But you're welcome.
Well, I have a class from 1 to 2:20. This is why I haven't been making it to Mondays.
Yeah. If you want to show up after that, that's fine.
All right, here?
Yeah.
All right, I'll see you then.
All right, man. Yeah, your hair looks good.
Thanks, man. Your black beard is cool too.
Yeah, okay, so what? And this essay pointing out that Nagarjuna is somewhat pointing out the problem of thinking about thought, or let's call it the limits of thought, and how eventually when you start getting to the mathematical conception, the limit of thought, you have to start talking in paradigms. And then you can see this in the Western tradition as well, but obviously Nagarjuna is doing it, probably a good 1,000 years later.
Selfish.
Fair enough, though.
Well, no, but for totally different purposes.
Yeah.
I mean, Nagarjuna, it's...
I mean, for Nagarjuna, it's an answer. I have a feeling.
No, it's deconstruction. The idea is that, well, this is what I said. Now that what's in it. Our belief in the world is a belief because we are creating cognition spontaneously all the time. We're constantly cognizing the world. And the elaborate constructions of the world that we give to ourselves are the consequences of continuously performing cognitive acts. If you can show that in fact every cognitive act is paradoxical, or involves contradictions, or is unworthy of our credulity, and you practice that as a meditation, you come to a something which is not determinate cognitively, but is still mind. And that's the emptiness. Your emptiness in the main school, the Madhyamaka Prasangika, is to practice meditation logically, where you observe the acts of cognition in your mind, and you release them rather than grasp them. And if you overcome the habits of cognition, you experience a relation, a being. It's not even a relation, you just are it. And you are it in something that's not the suppression of intelligence. It's the very heart of intelligence. It's the thing that does the cognizing, but it's not a concept.
Does that mean you can no longer understand it?
Well, you understand. You never. The question of whether, I mean, the set theory does a very good job on this. The very idea of the concept of a concept, which is the set of all sets. The set of all sets in itself is paradoxical, because it already adds one more set every time you perform it.
And I guess, yeah, isn't existential. At least at what the Gardiner's function is possible. Then it would be something existential.
It's part of your religious practice. It isn't something that this was actually what I wanted to actually do the whole day. Is that, you know, the original, what we call philosophy, the Greek, we don't know much about any of it except Plato. Before Plato, there's very little information about what anything was doing. You have these texts, you have Aristotle's and some of Plato's reports about it. But in Plato, the idea that you come to a school and just read books and master concepts was anathema. They thought that was a terrible idea. Philosophy wasn't this big. It was an initiation to a higher possibility. Realizing what philosophy was about. It wasn't just elaborating concepts. Or even for
It's really good.
you know, there's probably a problem. I didn't do it.
Logic that was wrong. That is just dry concept. I know the concept is very little useful. The way that
I would say motivation. What's the motivation?
well, yeah, there's no. I mean, it's not Camus where you're moving up a hill with Sisyphus as struggles.
Well, that's a belief. A belief that there's nothing. Camus' belief is the hypothesis that there's nothing else can give firm life. Yes.
Well, it's a bite. Or maybe the process or the test is to stop thinking about the can affirm it. Just be there because that's all. And with that, you're raising.
I think it was practically the first philosophy book I ever read.
Myth of Sisyphus?
Yeah.
I almost fell asleep. I thought as a meta-narrative, very, very fitting for the actual topic. Because I didn't see if I was actually going to be able to get through
The book because it kept crashing every time you read it. It's the only alternative to the Ponzi scheme.
That's very true. But I would just say that I actually came across it very, very young. But I didn't get into this philosophy. Later I read, The Stranger, The Happy Death, The Plague, The Fall, blah, blah, blah. But then getting into the actual philosophy, very, very, very strong, which I think works really well for fiction. But in the philosophy, yeah, when you get to the end, it starts to, at least exhilarate to a certain extent. But while he's getting there, it's I guess that's impossible. It seems a little more than Yeah, the rock just
context of Indian thought. It's a skeptical position, but it's not a skeptical, a religious position. Skeptical Buddhist position. So like skepticism in the West, they say it's empirical, is not a religious position. In other words, it's skeptical. You have skepticism, which is skeptical precisely of religious position. Arjuna is not skeptical on Buddhist practice.
Right. Or the concept of rebirth we're talking about this before. It's a construct of this notion of oneness. That's
Alabama, not Alabama.
right. But I mean, that's what this is trying to trouble wrap is. I can understand that. I just don't think that actually discredits his argument. Or some of his arguments.
Well, the Buddhist position is, that's one of the positions that, for example, is that is there something that is well, but again, that's,
is the, let's say, the consequence of the thoughts that he's working with, or is that the accidents of the system that's working? I'm not sure.
It isn't an axiomatic system.
If it's not an axiomatic system, then it's thinking
There's an axiomatic system. There's an Indian axiomatic system as such.
you're talking about the context of
But in
how
Western
he's
thought,
thinking.
there are three that I know. There's Euclid, there's Proclus, and there's Spinoza.
I'm talking more about
Then
cultural.
oh, what do you mean? Well, there are assumptions.
Okay.
Assumptions.
Western skepticism is skeptical of religion. It's skeptical of many other
Many
things
other
as well.
things. Skeptical
Not
of
just religion.
No, it's skeptical of Stoicism, it's skeptical of cynicism, it's skeptical of Platonism, it's skeptical of Aristotelianism, it's skeptical of Epicureanism.
Exactly. But I would make the case that he's coming out of the same sort of religious tradition as Nagarjuna or the Buddhist philosophy.
So the question is, what is Buddhist philosophy? Philosophy in the West really loses its initiatory aspect to theology until, I don't know, Spinoza maybe. Maybe Spinoza has an initiatory aspect, Nietzsche has an initiatory aspect, maybe Hegel does. There's recently by Edgar Mead, who studies Hegel's relationship to romantic writing. It's deep. And if you read the lectures on religion, it's quite interesting. Yeah, may. There's a huge tendency in Western thought to be, because what happens with Christianity is that a fascination with belief, fixation with belief as such, becomes an essence. So that because religion itself is linked to a set of propositions, freedom, the development of thought independent of that freedom becomes a major task.
Yeah, that thought is built around
Not being soteriological.
Well, I'm talking about the Christian thought,
No, Christian thought is, that's what I'm saying, theology.
though. Yeah, that's built on an application to certain extent, even
No, exactly, it's based on freedom. In other words, the basic setup is about believing certain things. Paganism isn't about believing. until very late when it's in competition with Christianity. You begin to have things that are like that. They're believing. Don't you see what I'm saying? Is that Nietzsche's idea about Christianity is pop latent. I don't know the best of the accurate, but it's certainly the case that it's philosophical.
Well, but
I mean, the incarnation.
But hold on, it's pop Platonism with a very, very aimed ultimate form that somehow interacts with.
Well, whatever. I'm not saying is that hold it on our feet is that it's natural to see the way in which it magnetized the whole field of thought.
Yes.
So that philosophy itself is about belief or not belief. So what people do when they study philosophy,
But that doesn't mean that only or that getting rid of any sort of religious influence is correct.
But it might be that the way out of the impasse of philosophy is to see that there might be another way of practicing mind than defending beliefs. In other words, exactly what we were talking about before. Not necessarily. The point is, that you might, and that's where Nagarjuna comes in. Because Nagarjuna works with the idea that look at what your mind does. Start there. See what happens if in the instant that your mind thinks something, instead of following that thought, holding it in those thought, you just allow the next thought to come.
I bet you. And they're taping it too. I bet you. Well, maybe.
Well, look at the word Poland, but it's just the word already obscures it. But I'm just saying, if you're told to do something, try this and see what it feels like. Basic rules of exercise are all about experiencing the environment. It's on it. That's the problem. That should happen. Instantly, just a radical get 30 seconds. And if you start having enough experience, as long as it's not too high, you start noticing that there's something odd about but the other way of doing mind.
No, totally, it's fine. Aren't you used to it? Totally fine.
Things abstract yourself.
Thank you.
From the stream of
That's required.
What happened Saturday? Thank God. The gods were helping on Sunday. Oh my God. Oh my God. Why didn't you understand the kind of
another aspect of your experience. And then you describe that and you go back to your building up of this kind of space. The whole thing of philosophy always has to do with the model of the way that you're making a text. And your whole question of logical consistency really has to do with the internal consistency of the proposition of a given text. And our modern situation is we notice.
So what's the schedule for the rest of the day?
That different texts have different consistencies. If you do them under different circumstances, you don't necessarily have to keep them all in relationship, except if you're making a big text that has to have all of
Oh my God, you guys are killing me.
Take some cookies too, Greg.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some cookies in everything.
Thank you.
There's coffee as well.
have different setup.
I just like to say hello.
You take the And you could. We need some trees.
We do, well, better concrete.
Yeah, well, they're a little bit further away. The moment those are talking about fracking the catchments quite yet.
Not yet, yeah.
Yes.
Not quite yet.
I didn't know what surveillance and fracking.
Did she say frack, baby?
There's a way to do it in Colorado, though. They don't let as much access tickets.
Thank you.
That's good.
Yes, we're helping in all this.
What you do when you extract the vast amounts of the fluids that you're purifying, and you can't even get their information about what they actually know and don't know because it's privileged information.
My way of being
I've been close. I have close. I check a lot of email buttons. My woman I live with is kind of big full-time. We are occupied by our professions.
I didn't mean to. But really, I've been recently, what's in my radar screen is the consequences of it seems that the risk for surveillance and rest have disappeared. I don't want to be violent, but no, but and there was a woman on yesterday talking about the surveillance now rolling on. So what are, and so in here, just in the very first one. Politics behind politics.
Maybe it's good. I don't think that's
Well, they
worse.
are, they absolutely come from, they come from.
Like a sandwich?
How do these work?
I have one. We got an event going on right now.
Oh, okay. I'm coming back at 2:20.
Okay, great. Do you do class right now? Or do you,
I have class at 1.
okay. So it will still be, we'll still have a meeting at that time. So you can be here for the meeting. Then, you have a philosophy event going on right now.
For a club?
It's for the Philosophy Club, yeah. So we have philosophers here talking about different things.
How often do you guys meet?
Every Monday. Every Monday right now. Usually it's in the library, 2 to 4. That has changed around for another day. But if you'd like to, so Jess, we'll see you a little later, okay? Do you want a soda or water or something?
Oh, no, thank you.
Okay. Basically, John Percio is the vice from here on the left. and we just have, this is the first kind of, we have lectures and that sort of thing, but this is the first kind of formal kind of chat session we've had. What's your name?
My name is Michi.
Michi, nice to meet you. I'm Jesse, Professor Allen. Nice to meet you too. Would you like some would you like a sandwich or something?
Maybe. Okay, perhaps.
It's up to you.
I was just curious about the books. I wanted to see what this was. I saw the books over there by Stein.
Yeah, he's the speaker. So, you know, we have, the meeting will be at 2. I'm not sure how much longer Charles will stay during the meeting. He might be here for the whole thing, but the meeting will be from 2 until 4. If you'd like to stop by. And we're just going to talk club business and that sort of thing. We have to have some talks about next year. We're going to need a new president and sort of thing. So we have one guy who's nominated. We nominated the president. And we might be to speak some club business, but we might have some. John might have prepared something to talk about. Or Charles will just continue talking about stuff they've talked about. So feel free to come if you like.
Yeah, I might stop by. I have dance club as well.
Okay.
So I might stop by after that.
Okay. Are they doing ballroom dancing today?
Yeah, they're doing that.
That's fantastic.
They're doing it today and tomorrow, actually.
I might stop by tomorrow because I'm interested in that.
You definitely should. It's exciting.
Thank you. It's a great. I love ballroom dancing. So.
All right. And your name was Professor Abbott?
Yeah, Professor Abbott or Jesse.
All right. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Richie.
I might grab one of these.
Those are eggplant. These are vegetarian. And these are vegetarian, right? This is some wraps with them, some, I guess, ham and other things. Tuna fish, ham, different things.
I see. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah.
What happened?
I don't think that's easy, but I think it like time.
No, that's also part. I'm not particularly healthy, so I don't expect to live for another 20 years. But everything happens so damn fast. It happens. The actual next economic disaster could happen at any moment because there's no correction whatsoever on what goes to the student debt level. What is it today? After 3 days, it hits $1 trillion.
And it was debt, and the last thing you're saying is I'm dropping the market. The loan rates are going down straight back up.
Well, you know about this thing that's going on about the people who are committed, people who are signing on to a commitment to not pay their student debts when 1 million people have signed on to agree to do it.
What's happening in Montreal? Follow the student protests. They like a couple of $1,000, maybe $6,000 for their entire education in the U.S. And there are hundreds of tens of thousands of students in the street right now. Protesting, paying that much. They'll pay for the entire bill. We just imagine how you say this is from our model. You guys sound like spoiled brats.
I think a lot of Canadian kids my age are very aware how close they live to the United States.
Well, and also the pressure is continuous to destroy the Canadian system.
Right, that's right. That's right. Yeah, especially given their last election. Yeah, that's true.
Why not? I mean,
But
I'd say it's lesser than that. I mean,
he is just
he hasn't lied to kill.
oh, he will.
But he will, and he's petitioning to destroy the very social safety net for your generation. I don't, and I tell people when I get railing on about health insurance and Social Security, I'm 60. I have good health insurance. I couldn't have any better health insurance. And I have a pension around the corner. Unless if I lose my pension, I'm really off. Right, that's the case. We're really in big trouble. So, but I'm not as trying to petition to get people health care. Doesn't affect me. I have it. But it's your generation who's going to entire generation. When you hear what's happening about careers will no longer be careers, they'll be tasks. You're no longer going to have a career. You're going to be trained to do tasks, and your whole life will be doing different tasks in organizations, companies.
Oh, this really is
Just tasks.
what I was kind of talking about, though. I have at least hope that corporation kind of fall apart. It's just too unyielding. Or have to be, just small businesses working together. But maybe that will happen.
No, the point is that there are lots of people who are trying to figure out all the different variations of how to live outside of the and that's,
exactly.
to me, if I were younger, I would be completely, because the other side of it seems pretty hopeless. Although, I'm almost at the end of my tether on this. The last one, I've held out for no matter what happens with the rest. And you don't know.
I'm still hanging on to that.
Yeah, but I'm very, very loose thread. Because it really is easy to believe that no matter what Obama really is, the actual direction is towards you don't even know what it is, actually. You can't even say what it is.
No, you're right, but then I absolutely think that, but when I was reading last week, I love
Yeah, I just saw him. It was just
he's my guy these days. He's terrific. And
but he says
very
this,
much down.
but his idea is everybody should be able to change comes when there's a watch, nobody gives a shit. That's what I was quoting. Except he didn't say anything about these gadgets.
Change comes with
Yeah, no, it's not.
It sounds like a
yeah, and change also happens.
It's like the change comes when one guy's got all the money.
We know organizations like Apple who are so strong.
Yeah, but so that's being dismantled now because it got such a bad press.
Well, just to Apple, I may be wrong, I mean, this is
We forget about eschatology.
two initiatives.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying.
Because now they're pressing on to
But it doesn't matter if they get destroyed, something else will take its place because there's nothing, there's no ceiling to the drive for power and you can have many different models for what people imagine they're doing. Is it people see that the world is really heading for disaster and they're just trying to grab all they can or create a bubble so that they're the ones that survive or that there's a class that survives.
Well, I think what worries most for me at least is I remember during the last crash, meeting the kids that were going to business economics, saying that they'd be graduating just when the market hit the bottom. Which I guess is a good pragmatic approach to a shitty situation, but then I worry how many of them, I guess cycles are somewhat endemic to the system.
Yeah, but there are so many things that are different, so that none of the classic things are nice.
No, they don't seem to.
Everything is totally different. The market is high now only because it was pumped up by the money that was supposed to go to the business. It didn't go to the business, it went to the market.
So when I say...
And that's why the market is high, because the banks bought stock rather than investing in actual businesses. No,
Oh, it's very thick. Jeremy and I is a very last have you seen it? Crash to burn. It doesn't for those who know how to do it.
Of course, but that's even normal. I mean, that's the thing is
but it was so
selling
something
short.
so sinister.
But that's selling short is part of the way things have been, and the deregulation have basically removed the limits on that situation, and also the limits on the ability of banks to lend out money to people who are going to lend out money, who are going to lend out money. So out of $1,000 that is real money that's been deposited, 900 of it gets lent out to somebody, who then lends out 800 to the next one. And so you get like 10 times as much money that's lent than exists. And so you have a situation that's insane.
When I say
what happens, the thing is that the people who have the money are doing weird things to hedge it. There's a huge manipulation of all kinds of things. Silver, oil. That's the...
Finally, Obama's come out and say something about oil, and then it was pointless reason. A year ago, he created a commission to do this thing, yet he could call one meeting. So, it's just... But at least he put the notion on the table.
For oil, yeah.
But why does that, why do Republicans get away with everything seems to do?
Well, because they're good at lying. They don't have any problems about it. And this is another piece of history that I've just been learning about. I've been reading about the early church fathers' complicated arguments for why it behooves the church to lie all the time for the sake of it's a book called Image Icon. It's also about the origin of the word economy in theology. Economy meant the entire system of interactions. That's like the interdependent origination process. But economy meant the whole set of relations between Christ and the world, between Christ and church and the world, between Christ and church and the mission to save people, and what you had to do in order to get people to repent and accept Christ. Then it involved church polity and what the church had to do in order to survive. And so the economy became a term for justifying basically everything within the entire system, including the early theological but also the way the church relationships between the church and people. And then eventually, as the church started accumulating wealth, it included what kind of finance. Slowly get distracted from that economy, which also continues to absorb everything else. In the sense that our idea of economy is one of those. They're back in Poughkeepsie, and everything is happening May 1st. There's a huge May Day thing where everybody's going to both Albany and New York and big centers. I mean, there's it's been a call for a general strike that everybody should do as little as they possibly can. But then there's well, no, there's been that. There have been big Occupy things with education.
Basically, as this thing being handed down, I didn't get a touch date.
You're right. No, I hear you.
I look for you to get our
We're silent.
I'm just saying that you want to comment on methodology. I mean, I didn't support kids. Everybody's got to do the name. We have to put up simple things that everybody has to do.
On every one of the subjects, I mean, one of the things is that it tends to fall back to all of the different particular Tea Party occupiers who are dissatisfied with
Hey, Jesse, how old is this station?
lots. No, it's just that the rate, spirit is just a people's heads. It's hey, hi.
How's it going?
Do I what? Yeah. I mean, it was interesting to hear him because it was a very polished moralist. It reminded me of
They give you a week ahead of time before everybody gets there.
Phil Berrigan.
Grab some services to get some cookies.
In a certain way, because it was, it was fundamentally.
Those are all fake plan
analysis.
Those are all fake plan to do something different. Hey, how you doing? Are you here for the philosophy event?
No, I'm sorry.
What's okay?
I have a question. I don't know if you guys know. Do you know where Chris reports?
Yeah, if he's here, he's through those doors. And
oh, okay.
I'm not sure if he's here, though. He was here a little earlier.
Okay, I just need to make an appointment. I had no idea where his office was.
Yeah, if you just go in there, they'll point it out to you. He's sort of in there to the left is his office.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things that I remember was very different during the Vietnam era was that there was a pretty intense social, spiritual split between the hippie culture and anti-war culture. There were overlaps in communication, but there was a lot of hostility. It wasn't just one culture. I mean, the serious ones were ferociously, they saw the hippie thing as just this kind of bourgeois thing. And as far as I was concerned, there were an awful lot of hippie people who were just oblivious. I mean, whose idea was this is my classic icon of it. There was a guy I knew who was a fantastic free jazz musician, saxophone. And one day I talked to him, and he said, well, he doesn't really care who wrote this. Doesn't matter. What matters is timeless. It's throughout the entire universe. So if we fuck up, we fuck up. And that was his, from his acid vision, his great spiritual tradition. And there were people like that, they had an instant real. But it was really, it was like, they had a real experience of something transcendent. And so they disconnected from the war. And the people who were serious at taking risks and resistance really found out, horrendous. It was horrendous. I was right in the middle of both camps. I wasn't not as nasty. I was already practicing meditation. It was all very weird to me, and suddenly everybody.
Very right. I'm sorry that you see the best of times, worst of times.
It is for a lot of people. It's just a question of awareness.
The best of times have been had.
Anybody's got an income. I mean, the classic thing that has changed, and we did a foreclosure panel on foreclosure. We got a real headshot talking about it. Well, one of the really clear things is that the thing that's called the middle class really doesn't exist anymore. And the difference begins around 2005, and it's the difference between having a sustainable income with savings and a bit of equity, and being able to sustain your standard of living. That looks like the middle class. That is an utterly different situation. There's nothing comparable.
I'm glad. Well, I do have to go. I've got all this. No, I know. I've got. We can talk about this sometime. Yes, you too. Yeah, what's optimistic? What is there to be optimistic about? Record that for me. I want to know.
We are pessimistic. I used to be very, very pessimistic. But I never really saw anything from it.
From the pessimism. Well, that's good. I mean, I'm saying, my picture about possibility is it doesn't matter what the facts are, you turn them into possibility, whatever. Yeah, and so you don't have to be optimistic or pessimistic. You still do the same thing.
Are you self-sustaining?
Not at the moment. If I wasn't in school, I could be.
Are you going into debt day by day?
No, I got fairly lucky. I mean, my parents didn't get hit as hard as some people during the crash. But they're certainly not doing anywhere near as well as they were. But at the same time, I got like typically, let's say I don't get any grants for the school I'm going to. With the money I have gotten in grants and scholarships and all of that, by the time I get my bachelor's, I might have 30,000 in debt. And that's
But you're
without
going into
working
computer
in summer
world,
jobs.
so you probably have.
Yeah. So I don't think that's too much to worry about, especially with a more career-oriented career. That's not to say plenty of other of my peers aren't completely screwed. And for a long time, I was very, very angry with the previous generations for the colossal fuck-ups on every single level. What I think really pissed me off was, I was up for 13 hours right now, and I got to watch as I matured the entire country go progressively more and more crazy, more and more schizophrenic. And then it all comes home to yeah. And then it all comes home to roost, and everyone's, all upset about it, and all I can say is, what the fuck did you expect? Like, so can I really be mad about it? No,
But I'd say
it
that
sucks.
affect doesn't, it's just affect.
This is the Kenny Lopez.
Right?
With Charles Stein.
I mean, should I be pessimistic?
Talks about politics.
Well, then why be a pessimist about it? Why think you know what's going to happen? Other things. Just look at it, you look, you can see.
But I think too that if you were born after World War II, for my generation, within reason, I think just looking at the rest of history, you got incredibly historically and geographically drunk. For a while, yeah. Which is more than,
Or unless you didn't have. I mean, unless you're like me, in which I'm not on a token, I didn't cash in my chips and now broke. I don't know what the fuck.
We do events like
but
this.
there's sandwiches over there.
Yeah, no,
so.
really, absolutely. No, but like my childhood was from the time I was 3 or 4 years old, I was afraid of being bombed.
Yeah.
Because what I had, the most vivid picture of the world that I remember from my parents was the destruction of Europe. The word Europe meant this incredibly miserable, horrible place that had been destroyed. And every time an airplane passed over the sky, I was afraid it was going to drop a bomb because nobody had explained to me why that wasn't so. Planes meant bombs.
Yeah, but I guess maybe, I hoped you guys lived through the Cold War, and then really nothing really happened except for the Vietnam War. Tons of, horrible things that were fairly minor.
Happening otherwhere.
Yeah, happening otherwhere. And, relatively minor compared to the fear that was pounded into your heads, about nuclear war.
Some people kept yelling about it. But it went to sleep, particularly after the end of the no, I mean,
but I would have hoped that, you guys would have been smarter when they started talking about, a terrorist is just going to blow you up on your street corner or something. We need to install the Patriot Act. We need to go have all of these wars, with people that have fucking stones.
I feel like I was bombed at that thing, because I was in intensive care when the towers went down. I had had a stroke 2 days before. I was in intensive care, and everybody was trying to not tell me what had happened. But it was, and I was doing a particular Buddhist practice while I was Buddhist, which is you imagine you're taking all the world's misery into yourself and connecting it to yours. So I'm lying here not knowing whether I'm going to die and thinking about all the things that were going to happen. That are obviously going to be an anti-Islamic thing, and what was all the stuff that was behind why people would do this, the people who were killed, the insanity that was actually going to happen, taking all that on and connecting it with my own mortality.
The sandwich snacks over there.
But my life has been, I told you so. Very little has happened. It wasn't tough. It's going to happen at the end of the Cold War. Under the Cold War.
It was very naive about what that this is going to back to bar. He said, this is everything's going to party. So he didn't report it back.
Yeah. But what it was going to be, that it would turn out to be Muslims that would be the new enemy.
But you were talking about terrorism expressly. That was the thing you were talking about.
Yeah.
But I think that's the thing. I was talking about there are two. I would say two things that are out of this credit. One is basic standard of living. The second is well, no, but right now, because you're never hungry. And the second is that the second thing is predicated on your artists. Your artists are always mindful of us. It's that kind of I don't think you can take that for granted. There's a lot of people who don't have people who invented this city, invented an event. And that's significant.
I think what we were talking about before is the main thing, that you don't look as fact as the end point. It's a fact, one quote is like, people think facts are where possibilities go to die. But instead of thinking of it that way, you think facts are the grounds of more possibility, period. So you never take your eye off the facts. Facts are where is what you have to stay with. The whole nature of fact, the ontology of fact is possibility, not the other way around. I think that's the revolutionary. The one slogan in the Occupy, there was a slogan that actually moved me to tears, and it came out the day they closed Zuccotti Park. Then the next day there was this huge, everybody came out, 30,000 people that marched over Brooklyn Bridge, and they threw the bat signal. I didn't tell you about this, but there were these people that had a bat signal that just said 99%, and projecting it on the sides of buildings from Brooklyn all through New York. So people on the bridge, they saw the Batman, the mountain sign. The guy, I met the guy who did it, this machine that could do that. But one of the slogans that they were chanting was, "This is unstoppable, another world is possible." And it's like, just the feeling of that was so affecting. Maybe that's all there is that people your age and younger, and it's already like, I already met like 20 years old and complaining about the youth. Maybe the naivete of the 16-year-olds.
That's where it starts.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, imagining another way of being. That's what this David Graeber book looks like. I haven't read that. This book called Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And it's an analysis of the history of debt and the ethics of debt, and the way in which the creation, the way the power classes have maintained power again and again and again is through alternative periods of militarism and slavery and debt management. So, when at every point where it looks like there's going to be a populist uprising, something happens to put everyone in debt. And so the debt side is everybody lives in a situation of guilt where they think it's their fault. And then you switch to the other side, in which it's sinful to be the money lenders. And it flips from one side to the other, and he traces the history of that from the beginning. But another part of it is a kind of anthropology of human relations, in which, this is the Levinas thing that I want to talk about. Because in the Graeber book, he gives a picture of unmetaphysical, ordinary ways that people simply care for each other, without making it into a without making it into a complicated metaphysics of exchanges or anything. The normal thing is you do something for me, I remember it, and I like you, you do something back, you do that. As soon as that becomes quantified, you have ignorance. And the picture of that as the basic human possibility, rather than drives and greed or basic human nature or any of that, is so effective that the idea that in order to understand how you can have recognize the importance of an other requires such a cockamamie theory of the face of God and postmodern, all of this stuff just seems so unnecessary and unuseful in terms of creating a world in which we care for each other, and that becomes the basis of how we live. That's my moment of it. Not that I agree with this about
yeah,
but still, it just seems that's not the way to go about it.
Well, I guess it maybe is a nice philosophical approach or response to like utilitarianism.
No, of course, it's a response to 100 things. It's a response to fetishized ontology. It's, in order to be my Parmenideanism, I have to deal with that. And find out what, do a dialectic with it. That's what I agree with. Because I think basically his picture of ontology is firstly a misreading of one of his own fields. He knows a lot better than the way he characterizes it. No, because it's the picture of ontology is precisely, we can get to this morning. The point is that the two sides of ontology is being as identity, and the other is being as the actual. Okay? That's why I was going with the set theory. Extensional
Levinas
sense
says that even taking ontology as the first philosophy.
That's the problem. No, that's right. That's right. But there's another, and I think that's only if you take ontology in the sense of determinate being. When you have the idea, because what happens in Western ontology is you have, you can do this if you run through Neoplatonism carefully, which is another thing I'm studying. A lot of it is that in Neoplatonism, being is a high position in the hierarchy, and the lower positions in the hierarchy are seen as deficient in being. So matter has no being. It doesn't have no being. It doesn't exist. Does it not exist? But it's the bottom. It's shit, basically. The material world is shit. And if it's not shit, it's this neutral stuff that has to have higher forms projected on it in order for it to have being. The matter is the raw stuff that has no identity, onto which the forms are projected, so that it then can, in a distant way, participate.
Yeah, but then that's assuming, that I think Levinas would argue that when you operate in a framework, it's coming from that place that matter needs some higher power to project onto that. That what you end up doing is trying to project yourself on people.
No, his idea is that you become the projector, so you don't see the other. Yeah. That's right. I would agree with that. I would agree with that view of the whole ontological situation. That is the consequence.
So then, how does he
Because the whole point of the Heideggerian position is to open up the question of being beyond the history of being. And he pretends that he doesn't know that.
I think he says, that all philosophy after Heidegger has to take him into account.
Well, yeah, but how does he do it? He doesn't do it. Anyway, saying that it's fine. Whatever his material is talking about interesting things, it's very interesting. But it's part of something to me that is a headache. I have another way, another analgesic than that. And I don't think it would require the entire history of being in order to be responsible, or the face of God, in order to recognize that its basic relationship to other people is that you care. Now you don't need Heideggerian care in order to care. You don't have to ontologize care. But if you're, you can
say time though, it's only been what? 70 years maybe since the Holocaust. And there's been, how many atrocities since then?
It's gone on. I mean,
so
the very wonderful Jewish writer.
Is it really that simple?
No, it isn't. But the question is an analysis of what our situation is. It isn't. Anyway, I'm just growling about this. So get back to serious. Something. Anyway, what I wanted to say about Graeber is that it has a very. He was one of the guys who got the Occupy movement to work with a horizontal kind of anarchist perspective rather than progressiveness, Marxist things. And his book that came out last fall, called Death the First 5,000 Years, is very valuable book to me. Yeah, very, very valuable. If I had one book to recommend, it would be that. And because it is a hopeful book. It's not a pessimistic book. He writes very, very wonderfully.
Yeah, I've heard. McKenny, you got any good questions?
Well, we're talking about politics right now.
But no, let's get on my
politics as well.
Well, I want to go to my real body.
Parmenides, you're going to occupy talk.
But I mean, want to deal with the Parmenides again? Even Parmenides, though. Well, that's going to change today.
I mean, I really, now there's more people. Could you come somewhere and maybe, or Jesse maybe move into the aisle so I can see everybody.
What were your names again? Amanda and Gisela. Charles Stein, I guess. Is that correct?
So are we now the Philosophy Club?
This is
Technically,
I'm not sure.
This is a prompt gathering.
Well, let me
hear about the event.
Well, yeah, I told them last week.
John, great. It's great.
I mean, I assume that you people have some interest in philosophy. That's right.
I'm not sure, but it sounds interesting.
You're not sure, but it sounds interesting.
That's good enough.
Are you part of this, or you?
Sandy Kovac is my colleague in English.
Can you come into?
Okay. I have a little while before I teach, and I just thought I saw your email, so I said I'd come over and sit for a while.
You saw great. So I'm glad you have the sandwiches. It's good. This is Gavin Frechette, who's one of the
I always know that it's interesting.
Some years ago. That was one of our lowest. He's just a match. Really good people. You graduated, but you're still here. Sorry? Yeah, that's really, he's a Tunxis hanger.
They won't let me hang around the high school.
Did you get involved at all?
I've been, my brother's there quite often. And I've been there a few times.
Chair meeting.
New York, yeah. That's not really my same, really. I mean, wait till the battle's over.
No, it's not fair.
It's the battle's over, man. I don't know, like, they're brutal. The cops are super brutal.
I know exactly.
That's part of my barrier to understanding it. I keep on reading about it, and I don't think I understand the full concept.
And I think that the first thing that was important to me was reading a piece that said, don't think you can have any idea about this by reading about it. You got to go down there and sort of do it. But now there's no there to go to. I mean, there's no there was something that happened in September, October, November, that you could only taste by going there. I mean, one of the main things about it was the enormous variety of different attitudes that people had there. There were like, tables and tables and tables of people on different sides of different kind of subject, and it was all about kind of trying to imagine another world, and with the focus on domination of wealth, so domination of money as the ontology of this here. Let me talk about that. That's what I'll go with. But anyway.
You want the microphone here?
No. It went off. I mean, it's about.
We are still recording. We're still videotaping.
Oh, what I see. So I should. It's on, but it's got a red. Well, I don't want to. I mean, it's fine that it isn't broadcast.
No, that's rather.
I don't mind recording, but I just don't want it to have to be talking from there when I'm talking here.
But it is recording to there.
Well, and it's not
only recorded that it is broadcast. We still want it broadcast.
It's ridiculous.
We're recording for nothing. It's just recording still.
Well, it's too late. It's already. We've gone for 3 hours. 3.5.
It's
a long time.
Yeah, it was.
It doesn't need to be recorded. No, wait. Let me. I want to work back to it. That what I think the common thing that this Graeber was talking about, and that probably you get it sometimes is that our world has very, very clearly become one in which all value is quantified. That value is it's like that MasterCard ad in which they show, somebody going to a ball game on a nice summer day, and they'll say the cost of the ticket, and the cost of the beer, and the cost of the peanuts, and the cost of that. Summer breeze priceless. But the implication is that in order to get to the summer breeze, first you have to have the baseball ticket, and you have to have enough money to buy the beer and to bring your friends. And in order to do that, the way to do it is to go into debt with a MasterCard, which seems to be the only way that most people can have access to that. But the point is, the thing that is saying is that over all value, all the things that one can value, there is a price. The value can be quantified, and the quantification for value is money. And what I was going to go to is make a comparison between the two meanings that we have for the word materialism. We talk about materialism in a philosophical, technical sense as the belief that the only thing that's really real is, it used to be matter, but it would be matter, energy, space-time, and recently had information. So materialism is matter and energy. The belief that that's what's real. And the other materialism is the belief that all value is quantified. And what they have in common is quantification. Because the materialism of the physical sense is the interpretation of being, for a moment we call it existence. The interpretation of what counts as being really real is that aspect of what we experience, what we see, what we think about, which is capable of being measured. That is, what science does in every case is it locates an area of experience that can be measured, does all of its measures, and then discovers all of the kinds of quantifiable relationships that it can, and does that exhaustively. Then puts that in relationship to other areas that can be quantified. And I'm saying that's materialism. Is that the interpretation of reality in such a way that the only thing that really counts is what can be measured. And the other materialism that says the only thing that matters in life in terms of value is the way in which things that we value can be put a price on, is exactly parallel. And the two become possible because of a particular understanding of the nature of mathematics. So that there's a connection between these areas of these two, the understanding of these two areas of being. So one area is what we value, and the other is what we take as real. And so this word ontology, which comes from the Greek word the grammar is complicated, but it basically means being. Ontology would be the general study of being, the general study of what is. That's ontology. And you can think of philosophy, not only philosophy, religion, any kind of thinking, as each area having its own ontology, that is, its own way of understanding the whole of being. So what you would call a worldview. Yeah.
Like, what do you mean by being? Like living being or just being in existence?
That's what ontologists tried to dope out. Okay? So in general, one thinks about being as what something is, what exists, one's own being. You know, as you can see, the word has these different uses. You talk about being as what's really you, your real being. In my being, I felt. In my being, I really think. In my being, I really believe. So that sense, there's that sense of being. And there's also a sense of being as all the different things that existence could be. Because it's really
what are you doing here?
Existence is.
What are they doing?
Ontology.
What's this?
The same thing. But that sense of ontology is the sense of thinking about what is really being. And that could include the sense of what's really valuable. So I'm saying there's an ontology of money. That money is a way of looking at a reality in terms of a quantifiable sense of value. So when the occupied people say another world is possible, the deepest sense of that is there a way that we can imagine a world and then maybe create one, which is other than determined entirely by values that are quantifiable? Because there are so many ways in our real being, in our real existence, in which we relate to each other, both positively and negatively, that are not about quantified values. It becomes insane that one's forced into putting numbers and making comparisons between what we care about our pleasures, what we care about our parents, what we care about our friends, what we care about our animals, what we care about the objects that we fetishize, what we care about the group of people that we belong to in different kinds of ways, and how all of those things become put into unnatural comparisons through being quantified. So I mean, so that's for me how thinking about these political issues and thinking about the philosophical issues of how we connect up.
It sounds like you're saying that unquantified values makes it almost inevitable commodifying values.
Well, I'll say that that's the same thing. That's what I'm saying. Modification of quantifying. How's it different? Commodifying would be, you know, how you trade objects, but you only can trade objects if you I mean, in our world, if you create.
that's what you were saying.
If you create a common ground so that you can put numbers on it, then you know what to trade for what. Yeah.
I think maybe going back to what we were earlier, actually limiting of possibility in the way that we possibly relate to move physical resources around. And the more quantified, the more
limit the possibility. Yeah. So I mean, what we were talking about before is that we got into a discussion about what the word possibility means. And I was saying, first we went through a whole thing about what possibility means in mathematical and analytical terms. But in ordinary sense, when you say something is possible, you mean something in relationship to what you can do with something. And I'm saying that there is two ontological perspectives. One that takes facts first, and the one that takes possibilities possibilities first. So that I was saying, in one perspective, facts are where possibilities go to die. And the other perspective, facts are the matrix or the mother or the source or the generatrix of possibilities. So that you can look at facts either as they're just the actualization of a pre-existent possibility, or you can look at facts as the concrete actual source of new possibilities. So we're talking about possibility in a sense as a value, and that when you completely quantify the facts in terms of their possibilities, you really limit the possibility, because you're only seeing them in terms of what you can already count. If the only thing that counts is what counts, you can't see all the ways in which things can come into being that are not particularly about counting.
What is the
Wait.
I think, too, now what's striking as well is that when you're talking about this qualification, isn't that as well just another metaphysical construct that doesn't even really have a relation even to what it's pointing to in, the difference sort of sense?
It has a very interesting history. It goes back to Mr. Descartes. And if you've studied, how many people have read some Descartes or read Meditations and Discourse on Method? I forget which one it is, but in one of those, I think it's probably in Meditations, where the whole point of that book is he wants to know how you can be certain. What can you not doubt? And he comes down with the famous, I think therefore again. But there's another part of that that's really profound and certainly dark. Because he says the aspect of what's real that we can be most certain about is the aspect of what we experience or perceive that's measurable. Other aspects of it is kind of fuzzy. In other words, almost by definition, what you can be certain about is what you can measure. In terms of your perception of the world. I'm not saying it's true. You can think about it, maybe you disagree, but this is what Descartes says, and how it relates to, I think, our whole socio-cultural, historical situation. No, it's empiricism, not just empiricism, because empiricism in general would just say what's real is what you experience, what you perceive. What Descartes is saying is the aspect of what you perceive about what you can really be certain is the part that you can measure. Because if I can measure it, and I give you the ruler to you, and you can measure it. It's going to be common, it's going to be public, it's going to be the same time each time out. All the things that certainty is supposed to be, you can find if the external, if you're concerned about measuring it. What do numbers do it? Find its extension. extension meaning how much of stuff.
So does that mean that things are less real, I guess, if you don't have the same knowledge as somebody else does?
Well, that's sort of implied in there. It's sort of right. But wait, that's only one half of it. The other half is, what aspect of my own intelligence can I be most certain about? And his answer, mathematics. So now in the usual picture of Cartesian philosophy, there's something called Cartesian dualism. He splits up being into two sides. What he calls res extensa, which means the extended matter. Res is matter, stuff. And res cogitans, the internal matter that does the cogitating, does the thinking. So there's one kind of reality, one kind of res, which is thinking, and one kind of reality which is extended outside. And the way we can be certain about what's extended outside is by only paying attention to what we can measure. Things, stuff. Just take, it doesn't matter. It's not the word. We do etymology on the word matter and get a bunch of other ways, but the point isn't those words. The point is this part of the external world that we can be certain about is what can be dealt with quantitatively. The part of the internal world of the mind about which we can be certain is mathematics. And the two link up. So we now got a complete ontology that's circular, that a decision has been made, that what counts as real in the world, what counts as real in the mind, is that which is capable of being calculated, as being enumerated, as being quantified. And it's the success of that legislation, the kind of intellectual legislation that Descartes puts into effect. It's the success of that dominates our world, both in terms of the materialism of belief in matter as that which is quantifiable in the external world, and what then is the part of it that he doesn't talk about, which is money, which is the evaluation of value. That we can quantify value mathematically. So we now have a complete ontology, one that is materialistic in the sense of the only thing that counts is matter, energy, time, space, information, and what is internal, which is what values, what we value, which can be quantified because of. Okay, wait.
So, modifying the theory takes us away from, let's say, we're a positive, but focusing on virtue and instead of focusing on that, we focus on commerce and market.
Well, we could even say that what happens in materialistic ethics is that we even interpret those values in quantitative terms. So we have a justice system, but it's almost exclusively in terms, it got to do with how many years you go to jail if you break the law, or how much money you get if you sue somebody for something. Or all of it. In other words, the commodification extends to values. That's the whole point. So therefore, it extends to ethics. It's not that instead of that, it's that it interprets ethics in those terms. The only thing that, like for instance, the two sides of that for us, that our eco-politics always seems to think that it agrees on, is war and medicine. We all agree that money should be spent on medicine, even though we're completely screwed up on how we're going to get health care. But nonetheless, the notion that that's what matters is what matters. Yeah.
I'm thinking a lot of worth, value, what that is worth something. That could be a illusion of wealth.
sign or something that smiles at everybody, starts conversations, or you know, maybe he doesn't have any money, but he can be worth something more than someone that has $1 million, than the politician that has, that has all this money. In my opinion, someone that's...
Yeah, well, you're saying that there is a source of value that's not quantifiable.
Yeah.
Although the subtle thing is that how all those things, this is why I mentioned the MasterCard ad, and how precisely the things that you think shouldn't be quantifiable get roped in some way. Yeah.
Something you think that, you know how Aristotle was talking about, he was the best food, he was the best player, so it's not like
I would oppose that. The best, there's an entire logic that is involved about this aristocracy, locating the best. And I think that and this is very much in relationship to art. How does this sound to you? That making art is an action in which we bestow value on something. I make something, whatever I'm doing, whatever it is, my sense is I'm making something that will contain some kind of value. Now that value may be absolutely new. It's not like I'm performing according to a standard that previously measures something and says how it's valuable, because that's Aristotle.
Well, how can someone understand anything about the framework?
Well, maybe I have to make the framework. Maybe we have to make the framework together. Maybe that's what the situation is, that otherwise you have the framework without the actual acts of value. Because the other side of the art-making value is that the receiver is making it too. You make your guy who's on the street who makes a nice sign. When you see that sign, you are recognizing, receiving the value, but in a certain sense you're also bestowing it. So that the value itself is something that actually takes place between someone who makes something and someone who receives it. And there's a kind of shared making between.
So also protesters making the war. And I know it's like, you can't just be ignorant to the war, you gotta be aware of things that are going on, but
it's complicated because some of that is very creative, some of it isn't. I don't even understand it. I'm really trying very hard to stay quiet. But I've just you mentioned the art thing and you mentioned the Aristotelian thing. It's like it seems to me that the question of who's the best flute player.
Is that the one that makes the most money?
Who is it? I mean, there's a lot of best flute players, and some of them get the gig in the symphony, and some of them sit out on the street and just play by themselves. And who should get the fancy flute? Maybe that's already too complicated. Maybe the best flute is the instrument that's most appropriate to the art that's being made. If I want to do computer art, then I have to have computers. If I want to do pencil sketches, I have to have a pencil. If I want to write poems, I can do it on anything.
But aren't there different levels of expertise?
There are certainly all kinds of ways of thinking about the way in which my ability to bestow value changes and can change in a positive direction, but it can also deteriorate. So you can have certain arts in which, for instance, I'm writing now about I'm doing art criticism, writing about a particular painter. And the maxim, I think it's from Horace, ars longa vita brevis, art is long, life is short. It takes long to master an art, but life is short. So this fellow was a very successful, beautiful watercolor painter, and he's saying to me, the longer I live, the better I get, the harder it is for me to actually bestow on my work the value that I want to get. Because the value isn't something that just comes from my expertise. It comes from my actual consciousness and my ability to perceive a new value and to bestow the material with it. And it actually gets harder the better I get. Now, he's not the only one to say things like that. That's something that artists start to face. It's a modern thing. It's not. There are contexts, traditional contexts, in which simply to get better at a traditional thing is a clear, linear process. It's true of the production of traditional classical music, but it isn't true of the composition of classical music. You know, it's true. You get better and better at playing an instrument until you get so sick of it that you just play the same old thing again and again. And you're no longer playing inspired or somebody else endlessly is rich and endlessly is growing. It's not a simple thing. And the question of just taking art in the sense of, in relationship to this question of value, that what I do when I'm concerned with making something is I'm bestowing value. And it might be, if it's in a very traditional way, that I'm simply performing in accordance with a standard. That's one way. But there's another way in which that's not what it is at all. It's I'm making something that is satisfying me, or it may be in a context, you know, of a group of people, and you're doing something that's for that context. It's not just satisfying your own inspiration and your own desire, but it always involves desire, and it always involves value, and it's only very artificially quantified. There is, of course, an enormous art market, which is one of the most insane things in the world, is the way in which, particularly paintings and sculpture, attains these enormous prizes. And how you hang out in the art world in New York, where there's incredible whoring of those incredible distorted human relationships of people who they spend all the time when they're not making their art, they're just trying to figure out how to get themselves in a position so that they're paying themselves $40,000 a year. So they can have 3 studios, one in Manhattan, one in Cantonese. So, yeah.
Expertise is interesting because I've seen in my own life things that I've worked on for a long time. I got to a spot and I'll say to somebody, hey, check this out. You should try playing piano. You know, try doing this or like something, creating something. And they'll do it better than I had for a stroke, you know. And it's like, so what is being an expert? Because I think it's all about creating, just about being taking away your ego in the sense that when someone comes to something new, you're not trying for anything, you're not going for anything, you're not trying to do something, you're just cool. Challenge is you're not really going for anything, you're just experiencing it. And I think the more that you can kind of do that, the better the art, like the less of an expert almost that you are, the better the art.
I was just saying there are all kinds of situations. You know, there are expertise in different cultures have very different senses. For a while, I was married to a woman who was a potter and who was very devoted to Japanese pottery. And classical Japanese pottery, it's unbelievable what they do and how they do it. Like I visited a town in Japan, which has been since the Middle Ages, an entire town devoted to making pots. And they prepare the clay 70 years in advance. It takes them 70 years to get the clay to the condition. And the way they work with the pot, they'll have one shape, and they'll throw 1,000 pots, 1,000 in the same shape. And then they put them in a kiln that's a whole hillside. And in the kiln, they throw straw randomly throughout the entire place. Then they fire the kiln. And out of those 1,000 pots or 10,000 pots, there'll be 3 of them that are unbelievably amazing ones. So interaction of culture, of being able to throw the pot exactly the right way, this entire process, and pure chance. I mean, this element of pure chance that allows the straw to interact with the pot and blaze in exactly some way, but not in a way that you've controlled. The expertise is in having this condition under which this is allowed to occur. The interaction between precise skill, cultural condition, and pure chance.
That sounds like keto. Sounds like Zen archery.
Zen archery is another one. Zen archery is still at the level of throwing the pot. It doesn't have a chance of it.
Yeah. But they dispose of the ones that are not perfect.
Yeah, they break them and they have all kinds of. I talked to a guy there who said, you know, if you're ugly or you do something bad, it will disappear. But if you're clay and you're thrown in an ugly pot, you're condemned for all eternity to be ugly. You know, so there's values, but I'm just, saying that the culture is, what we should know from the world is that the world is unbelievably prolific in its generation of cultural conditions and value conditions. And that we shouldn't think that that is something fixed in the past. Wherever a group of people get together and care for each other and care about their conditions, culture will emerge. And it will emerge out of the fragments of the previous culture. It's not like it's got to be only new. Everything is always reforming itself out of the material of what was previously there. But there is something in our nature, in our spirit, which is creative. And creativity isn't defined by any particular condition. It's really an emergent thing. It's something that happens under the conditions of one's actual working. And that may be isolated. It may come from the most isolated condition. I mean, I'm a contemplative myself. I'm a meditator. And my main thing is poetry. I write poetry. And it's poetry that has relationships to all this thing without a certain way. But it's a pretty isolated thing. It isn't something I'm like collective. But there is a sense in which it's a collective. I have a relationship to certain people. I know I'm an ignorant, and I read it too. I will really be able to do it for all so it can be an isolated thing. It isn't like alone versus isolated individual. There's this whole thing today about Western individualism and then attacks on Western individualism. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be this kind of adversarial dialectic. What I think it has to be is concrete. It has to come out of actuality. It has to come out of your actual conditions, whether those are social conditions or isolated. Yeah. Supposing you do that without the quantified business, without the idea of certainty. Say you want to act with uncertainty. You don't want certainty. Because the certainty came out of a kind of version of Christianity. We were talking about this before, that in the Christian world, there's a huge premium on belief. You believe something, you have a credo, and you better be certain about that, and you can only be certain about it because of faith. And so there's a kind of intensity around belief. And with Descartes, he's pushing aside the religious question, the question of faith, and he's trying to see what he can be certain of. But the motivation of it is really coming from, can you be certain about salvation? Be certain about what you should be.
I'm not quite sure what you're discussing.
It's philosophy.
Oh, okay. Is it like a class or?
Well, it's like it's just a presentation. Guest philosopher is here, and we've been talking about politics. We've been talking about art making, a lot of different things. So there's several subjects that come across to it.
Where's the best?
You taking a quick break?
We've been talking about the occupying a lot. Oh, really? Well, the psychology of the occupying. Now we're in the meeting.
Yeah, now we are.
That's what he uses quantification.
Right. That's right.
Are you guys actually enjoying it, or?
It's in turn.
Natural.
It's in turn to humanize.
I guess.
Sorry?
I mean, you're doing better than I do.
Yeah,
Sure.
sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the whole idea of expertise, I was thinking when you're talking
No, it's sexist against men.
Sure.
the abstract
Sexist against men.
Join us. Grab some food.
To assume that only men would be interested in philosophy. Yeah, is that sexist against women?
Yeah, the context.
I think that's like this whole thing that's from a woman. Growing up, they kind of
So what are they
qualifier for any kind of
Yeah, what don't you understand?
It's always whether someone is selling out or not. It's always how we frame things. And as I got older, I began to think about artists who took the initial step is, and they would do what we would call sell out, you know. But then they would do that so they had the freedom.
But I mean, it's the difference between
that was kind of the
subjective to objective.
I began to
like qualitative
allowances for that kind of process.
Is
this is sort of an inevitable relationship to a world that doesn't.
Oh, you're talking about
it has to interact with it in some way. I can make a decision. Like, I mean, for example, Charles has not been involved with traditional academic fields. As a teacher, so he's been a teacher of a lot of individuals privately.
Yeah, but I mean, on the stage,
which always has to make decisions about
something like that. And it was also
American Idol
rich and never really had to worry about it.
So everything was already quantitative.
It's strange because there's such a relationship that one has to process advertising culture, like Coca-Cola sponsors music. So to what degree is participation from that?
And he doesn't even get what I'm saying.
There's a lot to it.
He goes down.
Then there's an issue of genuine artists who have to connect to a public in some way. So the vehicle they might use, might have some serious singers who might have might work that way, work through a process like that to reach the public. And then there's something that's less legitimate about that than other pathways. But I think that
just completing the math.
I think at the very least it's really conscious of the commodification of everything, because that's simply how things work. I mean, that's essentially how the world works. You know? But like, here's an example. I think you're someone with a very high aesthetic standard. You're very unpretentious about it. If you don't like something, you're very forthright.